This guy with glasses gets totally caught off guard when a blue-haired maid hops onto his back and announces she's taking a break, leaving him completely flustered. Standing outside the massive office building with all his co-workers, he clenches his fists and decides he's officially done with this stressful job because he's got a magic tower to build. This guy's name is Edvard Koch. Suddenly, everything around him just turns into a total blur. He wakes up on the cold, hard ground with his head totally spinning, trying to focus while the stars swirl all around him. He pushes himself up and kneels under a massive starry sky, grabbing his head in total shock as he sees his co-workers waking up all around him just as lost. Standing right there is a massive dude in ceremonial robes with his arms wide open, yelling at the top of his lungs that the summoning was a total success. Everyone's suddenly dumped onto a hard tile floor, groaning in total confusion, while Edvard Koch struggles to his hands and knees with his glasses hanging sideways as he tries to wrap his head around. The summoner steps up with his hands together, welcoming the newcomers to this world and introducing himself as Ragona Akista, the kingdom's top royal mage. Everyone is totally speechless, and Edvard's eyes are popping out of his head as he asks if they just got isekai'd, which Ragona confirms by explaining they used top-tier magic to summon them there. He admits he knows they had real lives before this, then bows his head and apologizes for snatching them away without warning. His face goes totally cold as he drops a massive bombshell. They were only brought here to die, and everyone starts freaking out as the pure terror hits them. He quickly clears the air, explaining they only summoned people who were already about to die. And when he asks if they remember what happened, Edvard suddenly flashes back to a bus, screaming off The mage explains that everyone summoned to this world gets a special power, and as a tiny flame pops up in his hand, he says the most important thing is that they're still alive, smiling as he promises they're gonna love their new abilities. He started checking everyone's new powers, calling out coal magic for one guy and gravity magic for another, then predicted the next would be an awesome paladin before finally looking at a spy. The guy froze up because he was getting major bad vibes, and the royal mage just watched him, looking totally curious about what he'd do next. He said he'd never seen power like that before, and the kid looked up in total shock, asking if he was actually for real. The guy focused so hard, his face scrunched up. Then the royal mage finally figured out his special power and shouted that it was construction company. The guy was totally stunned and couldn't even get his words out, while his blonde buddy just started losing it because the name of that power was honestly a joke. The blonde guy explained to the confused mage that construction is all about designing and building stuff. Then he slapped his bummed-out friend, Kanoshita, on the back and told him to keep his head up. Training started right away, and a tough instructor with a sword told the group their first job was simple: just get used to how a blade feels in their hands. As the training kicks off, Kanoshita is already dripping with sweat and gritting his teeth from the sheer effort. He's shaking so hard he can barely keep his sword up, while the other summoned heroes, like that hyper-blonde guy, are swinging their weapons around like it's nothing. The power gap is insane. The blonde guy easily slices a training dummy in half, but then a girl with a ponytail completely obliterates hers, leaving him totally shocked. Kanoshita is totally overwhelmed and asks Ragona why a mage even needs a sword. But Ragona explains it's actually magic training because pushing mana through your body is how you wake up your hidden powers. To show they aren't joking, 2 more mages flex their powers. One summons a spinning gravity ball, while the other blasts a sharp ice comet. Kanoshita is totally speechless and terrified by their insane power, while Ragona just smiles, loving the results and hyping up everyone's unique skills. The top students are all hanging out and celebrating their success together, forming an elite little group that Kinoshita is totally left out of. Kinoshita's training ends in a total disaster, and he just collapses in shock because he can't believe how weak he actually is. While he's still struggling, the instructor claps his hands for a break and tells the hyped-up group to head to the dining hall, leaving Kinoshita all by himself. He watches them walk away, clutching his chest in total frustration because literally nothing he does is working. Somewhere else, life just keeps moving as two workers stare at a massive hole in a stable wall with a horse poking its head through, while another guy just chills on a pile of wood. As the sun sets, Kinoshita stands there all alone with a practice sword on his back and a look of total determination. Somewhere else in the compound, 3 students in matching gear are scratching their heads over a document, wondering if they're doing anything right or how they're even supposed to use the item they're studying. Everyone lets out a massive sigh at the same time. Then they decide to go grab some food and try again later, while Kinoshita stays behind alone in the sunset, still gripping his sword. He starts training all by himself, but instead of using magic or swords, he grabs a saw and a piece of wood, cutting it down with total focus. He picks up a hammer and nail, pounding them into the wood with one powerful hit after another. But he totally fails as the nail bends and the wood snaps with a loud crack, leaving him standing there with his hands shaking in pure shock. His eyes go wide as he suddenly realizes that building this stuff feels way too familiar. Back at their project, the 3 builders are staring at the shed in total confusion, and the bald guy starts tripping out because he's sure there used to be a hole right there. They stare at the wall in total shock because it's perfectly fixed, and that massive hole is just completely gone. The dining hall is packed and noisy, but Kinoshita is totally alone, just messing with his food while the other summoned kids talk and eat. He walks over to Mr. Akista at the dinner table, looking super worried, and the old man stops eating to ask what's up when he sees him fidgeting and staring at the floor. He hangs his head and admits he's totally useless in a fight, then asks if there's literally any other job he can do. Mr. Akista stops and strokes his long white beard, really thinking over what the guy just asked. He tells Kinoshita not to sweat it because support is huge in any fight, but then he drops a scary truth. Since they have 0 armor, they're usually the first ones to... He narrows his eyes and drops a huge choice on them, saying their only other way out is to leave the kingdom for good. Everyone is completely blown away by the idea, and Kinoshita immediately lunges forward to grab the old man's robes, demanding answers while the rest of the group just stares in total horror. He jumps back, totally panicking and waving his arms around to explain himself. He begs them to just listen for a second and see things from his side. He doesn't have a drop of... He drops to his knees like he's totally out of juice, but the long-haired girl jumps in to save him, yelling that he can build things even as another summon tries to quiet. 2 other guys back her up immediately, with one calling the whole thing messed up, while the other screams that you can't just summon someone and then toss them away like trash. Rigona shuts them down, saying he's not just leaving Kinoshita to get eaten by monsters, but the long-haired girl glares at him and asks if his plan was to ditch. Rigona puts his hands together and says he's been thinking hard, while a flashback of the group eating together reminds them they're a team. And Kinoshita finally looks up with a spark of hope in his eyes. He squeezes his fist, his voice shaking, as he asks if there's really another way, and Rigona tells him there is. Summoner pulls out a paper with a wild offer, telling Kinoshita he can actually own the Gallery of Fortress, and Kinoshita just stands there completely blown away. The whole group goes absolutely wild, cheering for Kinoshita and hyping him up about getting a sick car and running his own company. Kinoshita is totally blown away and bows low to thank Rag. Just like promised, the assistant finally shows up. A tall, cool lady with light hair and sharp glasses named Karen Maxwell. And Kinoshita is just standing there with his jaw on the floors. A bit later, they're finally heading to the fortress, but Kinoshita looks totally miserable in the back of the wagon as it bounces across the rough mountain road. He was clearly struggling, and Karen Maxwell totally caught him, looking up from her papers to ask what was up, while he awkwardly admitted he just wasn't used to riding in a wagon. He suddenly got a light bulb moment and asked if she could use her healing magic on him if the bumpy road started hurting too much. He looked super hopeful and begged her to help him, thinking he finally had a way out. She just stared him down and said she got it. Then, with a totally straight face, she gave him one simple order: drop your pants. He jumped back in total shock and started stuttering. But then an old guy in the driver's seat chimed in to explain that healing magic only works if you actually touch the wound. He stutters through an explanation that he's way too shy to show her his stomach, and while she says she won't force him, she warns him that he can't let. She gives a little smile and says she gets it. But just as he's trying to stay calm, the wagon hits a massive bump, and he tells her to get close to him so she stays safe. The sudden shake knocks them sideways, and he faceplants right into her chest, leaving them both totally frozen in shock. His mind starts racing, and he totally panics as he realizes just how much trouble they're in. Just as he tries to pull away, she grabs him tight and tells him to stay put, making him totally freak out because he's so flustered. He starts stuttering an apology, but she cuts him off to ask if he's okay, noticing he's burning up, and straight up asking if he's hitting on her, which makes him totally freak out as he tries to explain that any guy would get nervous being this close to a girl as smart and pretty as she is. Her face totally changes as she hears him out. She notices all that heat is gathering right around his belly button. Suddenly, it all clicks for her. That spot is the absolute center of. She stared him down with total focus, while Kinoshita tripped over his words, saying he could feel a massive wave of mana hitting him right then. She suddenly got this crazy look in her eyes like a mad scientist and wanted to pump him full of even more mana to see how their powers mixed, making Kinoshita totally freak out while Karen struggled. Just as she was about to move, a massive hit slammed into the wagon, flipping it over and sending everyone inside flying. The driver and his donkey whipped their heads around, totally confused by all the chaos. Another sudden jolt slammed them together, leaving a dizzy and sweating Kinoshita leaning right against her, while Karen realized his magic had finally turned on. She finally figured it out and shoved him onto the bench, pinning him down. She looked down at him with a cocky grin. She told him she was finally going to have to get. Kinoshita is totally stunned by how massive the Galleria fortress is as his wagon pulls up, since he expected this western outpost to be way smaller, and noticed there are barely any monsters in the area. As the wagon rattles toward the giant stone walls, he thinks about how this massive fortress isn't even considered a major target. Boots pound against the floor as a soldier sprints through the hallway like his life depends on it. This young blonde soldier bursts into the office and begs the woman behind the desk to let him live. She drops to her knees, totally out of breath, and reports that the new lord of the fortress is about to show up. The woman flashes a massive, confident grin as she takes his report. She stands tall in front of the whole army with a super serious look and tells Greta that it's finally time to move. She stepped forward like a total boss, her boots clanking against the stone as her soldiers marched right behind her. He definitely didn't go unnoticed, and Kinoshita's eyes went wide as he watched from a nearby doorway with Karen Maxwell right next to him. She stops right in front of him with a massive, confident grin and shouts a loud welcome, introducing herself as General Arietta Paimon. He looked her over, but besides her dark hair and weird clothes, she seemed totally normal, as Arita told him how stoked she was to finally meet him. Karen Maxwell watched the whole thing go down, thinking about how these country folks were totally freaked out by anything new, and the vibe was so intense that even the soldiers were shaking in their boots. Arietta leaned in close, totally curious, and straight up asked what his special skill was. But when she saw him get nervous, she quickly explained she was just hyped because she'd never met someone from another world before. He nervously admits he's from a construction company, and Arietta's face totally lights up as she calls his job amazing, begging for a demo until a super flustered Kinoshita finally agrees. He's facing off against General Paimon in a massive, sunny courtyard, while a huge crowd of soldiers lines the walkways to see what's going down. They've all got their arms crossed. He points to a patch of empty dirt and says he's going to build a wall right there, making the general's eyes light up as she tells him to go for it. He reacts by cupping his hands together and focusing every bit of his energy. He shuts his eyes tight and focuses every bit of energy on remembering that feeling from the wagon, because he knows he has to pull this off. 10 minutes crawl by, and the soldiers' hype completely dies out as they start looking super annoyed and doubtful. Even the general's permanent smile is starting to slip as she asks how much longer this is going to take, and Kinoshita is sweating bullets while he grits his teeth and swears they're almost there. Suddenly, light blasts from his hands and hardens into a perfect window frame, making the general's jaw hit the floor as she screams in total shock and hype. She snapped into action and smashed a massive stone block into pieces, sending dust flying everywhere and totally freaking out Kinoshita and the soldiers. Even after showing off that crazy power, she just turned around with a huge grin and said it worked, while Kinoshita was stuck on the ground, totally wiped out, and barely able to speak through all the sweat. She picks up the window frame she just created and warns him that this is the true power of a lord, while he just stares at her, looking totally blown away and exhausted. She stared at the frame, and suddenly it clicked, her face totally changing as she realized his power was way crazier than she first thought. She turned back to the group, holding a piece of the broken block, gave a quick apology for the damage, and then barked at her soldiers to get everything back in order. Hearing that, Kinoshita's tiredness totally vanished as he got a massive burst of energy, clenching his fists and getting dead serious for what was coming next. Takumi was acting all tough until Karen Maxwell stared him down and said his full name, making his confidence totally vanish as he started to panic. Chilling in her office with her fluffy pets, Kara looked at Kinoshita and thought he was basically a helpless puppy with zero magic and no sword skills. But then she remembered a moment that changed everything, because when she held him as he lost control, the insane amount of power he let out totally blew her mind. She remembered how that massive surge of energy synced up perfectly with her own magic. That memory made her want answers, so she started digging through a massive old book to figure out the summit's crazy power. She'd read that this only happens when two people share a... Suddenly, a blinding light snaps her out of it as a huge guy in fancy robes appears, throwing his arms out to cast a massive spell, and Karen looks up in total shock, while giant pillars of water explode all around him. All that water swirled together into a massive hand and slammed shut with insane power. A second later, the giant water fist opened up, and the mage was just standing in its palm, looking totally chill, like the ultimate boss of the ocean. The mage suddenly pops in, and the whole vibe gets super intense. But Karen Maxwell just fixes her glasses with a totally blank face, deciding to just sit back and see what happens next. The next morning, Kinoshita shot awake so fast he nearly gave his maid a heart attack, and while he was busy apologizing, another maid just walked in and told him breakfast was ready. He slumped back onto his bed, feeling totally empty, watching his spirit friends vanish into the morning light while he begged them not to leave him behind. He shook off the weird vibe and headed to the sink, splashing his face with ice-cold water to snap out of it. He dried his face and turned around to see a massive breakfast feast that was way fancier than anything he'd ever eaten before. He checked out the insane spread of food, but he only grabbed one plain piece of bread. Holding his bread and a towel, he turned away from the table, his face turning bright red as he hurried away from the awkward scene. He pushes up his glasses, eyes glowing with focus, and as a drop of sweat rolls down his face, he totally locks in for what he has to do. He's getting a really bad feeling from that shut door, especially with all that gross, thick smoke pouring out and filling the entire hallway. He reaches for the handle, but jumps back when a nasty smell hits him, pinching his nose because it reeks like a gross, unwashed bathroom. He braces himself and swings the door open, but what he sees inside is totally insane. He stumbles back, totally grossed out, but his foot slips on a wet spot, sending a bucket of water crashing across the stone floor. He slams onto the ground, and man, that nasty stench is filling up the whole hallway now. He lets out a huge sigh, totally regretting how he didn't appreciate his clean, normal life. The maid rushes over, looking super worried, and asks if he's okay, but he's so caught off guard by her showing up that he just stares back in shock. His head is still spinning as he looks up from the floor to find the maid leaning over him, looking totally freaked out by how pale he's become. She helped him sit up and handed him a cloth, and even though he felt pretty rough, he gave her a weak smile and thanked her for being so nice. He pulls himself together and tells her he's the new owner of the fortress, but the maid totally misses it, winking and asking if he's a new worker who needs help because he looks like a total mess. Her smile instantly vanished as his words finally clicked, and her eyes went wide with pure horror when she realized he was actually the owner. She was totally shook, and suddenly 2 more identical maids appeared out of nowhere, with all 3 of them dropping into a perfect bow while shouting their apologies down the hall. The maid looked up just enough to say her name was Dain Luludora and apologized for not knowing him, but even though Kinoshita tried to tell her it was all good from the floor, she finally looks up with a bright red face, staring him down so hard that Kinoshi gets totally weirded out and starts checking his cheek to see if he's got something on it. He waves his hands around to play off his awkwardness, telling the new maid he just heard people here were weird. But she just keeps her cool and says servants come in all types. Suddenly she flips the switch, balls up her fists, and yells that he's not scary at all, leaving him totally stunned and thinking that it really just depends on who you ask. She leans in super close, her face turning red with hype as she calls him kind, polite, and honestly kind of small and weak. He jumps back and yells that she's totally wrong, leaving the maid completely confused by his sudden freakout. She snaps out of her confusion instantly and, with a huge grin, drops a total bombshell by asking him to make her his personal maid. She doesn't even wait for an answer before heading back to work, leaving him standing there all alone and shouting after her about a handkerchief. He's blushing like crazy and trying to stay focused on being a loyal servant since he's not scared of her, but his brain completely short-circuits when he remembers her body and starts comparing her chest to 2 massive melons. He kept pushing through the building with a look of pure disgust, pinching his nose because the smell was so nasty you could actually see it floating around like gross smoke. This fortress looked like a literal palace from the outside, but the gross smell inside proved that looks can be totally deceiving. The place was a total nightmare, pitch black and crawling with rats, while the gross smell of the toilets filled the air. So he grabbed his head and freaked out, wondering how anyone could actually live. His face twisted in a total panic as he realized he had to act fast to kill that gross smell and change everything immediately. One desperate goal finally snapped him out of his panic because he just wanted a real bathroom, so he screamed his new mission to the empty hall. First things first, he's building toilets. Karen Maxwell marches down the stone path with total confidence, leaving a guard on his knees behind her. She looks totally intense, her eyes sharp behind her glasses as she fixes her blazer and grips a folder of documents tight under her arm. She walks into the office, her fuzzy boots clicking on the floor, and sees a guy with slicked back hair sitting there with a super creepy grin. He looks her right in the eye and congratulates Karen Maxwell on her big promotion. Grin's grin gets even wider as he tells her she's the new secretary for the fortress master, mocking her bad luck while she just keeps a totally blank face. Later, as she walks down a brick hallway, that same officer hands her a document, and she takes it with a quick thanks while looking totally distracted. As her heels click against the stone, she knows for a fact that this is definitely not a promotion. Her shoes clicked against the stone floor as she walked right up to the massive doors of her new master's room. She gave the door a quick knock and called out, "Good morning, sir, it's me." The door flies open before she can even finish, and she sees something totally wild. A spiky-haired guy with glasses is just sitting on the floor looking completely out of it, and he just mumbles "morning," like he has no clue what's going on. Her eyes went wide in total shock as she stared at the crazy scene right in front of her. She was totally losing it, because there weren't just one, but three identical guys, all tangled up on the floor, and the one who spoke just blurted out that he wanted to build a toilet. He quickly got his act together and asked if he could just start building, or if he needed to check with someone first. So she snapped back into work mode and told him it was totally fine as long as they planned it out, which made him look super hyped and full of energy again. He plopped down on the stone floor and asked what his new job was, but she told him to just chill after his long trip, since they'd handle the details tomorrow. And he's sitting at his desk sweating bullets and looking totally stressed, while Kara Maxwell stands right behind him, holding a massive stack of papers. She asks if he needs anything else, so he mentions the message about the dying Lillador wanting to be his maid, and tells Karen to handle the details, which she says is no problem at all. Karen drops a total bombshell by asking if he slept with a girl, leaving Kinoshita completely shook as he flashes back to Luludora calling him master. He flips out and denies everything, demanding to know where she heard that, but she stays totally chill and points out that he's acting way too guilty for an innocent guy. He's still a total wreck and swears that's not why he's so worked up, insisting he only picked her because she seemed like a genuinely good person when he saw her kneeling on the stone floor. After explaining everything, he pats his chest, feeling totally relieved, and tells her to hit him up if she needs anything else, while Karen just gives him a quick professional bow. He looks away for a second, but then his face turns bright red as he realizes she's way too good at catching him off guard. He stands in front of this huge, empty room that's basically a fresh start for his next big plan, and after looking around, he gets totally serious and says it's finally time to get to work. He shuts his eyes, blocking out the whole world just to lock in. A perfect map of the room pops into his head, showing him exactly where every piece of furniture and every wall is sitting. He kicks off his plan with something super practical, drawing a quick sketch that shows his first big goal is moving the toilet. His first move is a total game changer because it's going to give him way more room to move. He makes sure to add a siphon so the place doesn't smell gross, knowing that even a tiny detail like that is huge for staying comfortable. To finish his master plan, he carves the whole place up into different zones for everything he needs. He smirks to himself, realizing his insane skills make it way too easy to see exactly how the whole plan is going to go down. He swapped into his work gear, threw his hands forward with a loud shout, and yelled that it was finally time to start building. Just like that, his power kicks in, and a solid brick wall pops out of thin air, with a window already built in that shows the bright daytime sky. The structure is growing at a crazy speed, and the wall is shooting across the room like it's nothing. By the time night hits, he's totally out of breath from the grind, but the window is finally finished and looking out at the stars. He hits his limit and crashes onto the fresh stone floor, totally wiped out. But he's got one thing on his mind. Phase 1 is finally over. Suddenly, a loud knock hits the door, and a young maid calls out, saying sorry for the interruption, but she's got his pajamas ready. She slammed the door open and saw her master crash to the floor, his soul literally floating out of his body, while she screamed his title in a total panic. She rushes to his side, totally panicking and asking if he's okay, but he can barely keep his eyes open as he mumbles that he's fine and just used up all his mana. She pulled his head onto her lap and told him to stop pushing himself so hard, leaving him totally stunned by how close they were. She grabbed his hand and told him his only job now was to rest, leaving him totally stunned by how much she actually cared. He just kept staring up at her, his face turning bright red as he completely lost the ability to speak. She looked down at him with a sweet smile and told him to just relax, promising she was right there with him. She went from being super chill to totally blushing and hyped, telling him he just needs some rest to get his mana back. And then she straight up offered her lap as a pillow or even an oil massage, saying she's ready for whatever he wants. She held onto him tightly, worrying out loud if she was a bad master, but even though he was totally wiped out, he spoke up to tell her she was wrong. A bit later, he wakes up to the morning sun and bolts upright, realizing a brand new day has already started. He balled up his fists in total shock, realizing his full power was finally back. He gets dressed and sits down at his desk, only to find Kara Maxwell staring him right in the face. She handed him a stack of papers and told him to double-check that everything was good to go. She suddenly announced his work was finally over, leaving him totally stunned and stuttering as he tried to figure out how it was already done. He tripped over his words, trying to say thanks, so she told him he was all set and handed him the fortress inspection papers. She lets him go, so Takumi gives a quick thanks and bolts, shouting that he's got to finish his construction work in the bathroom. Right in the middle of the bathroom, this nasty black slime starts bubbling out of the toilet, looking just like a monster waiting to jump an adventurer in a dark dungeon. He bursts through the door and freezes in total shock, staring at the monster as he realizes something is seriously wrong with the sewage water that just won't stop flowing. His brain is going a mile a minute as he realizes this weirdness is linked to those glitches from before, and he starts to wonder if his own insane magic is actually causing it all. Over in the hallway, Kara Maxwell runs into Dina Luludora, and the maid asks if she's still on the clock. She asks how the new bathroom is coming along, and Dean explains that Kinoshita built the walls and pipes all by himself instead of just using an earth mage, making the maid totally swoon, while Karen, later, she's just sitting at her desk totally zoned out until one word pops into her head: ambition. Still obsessed with Kinoshita's potential, Kara Maxwell walks through the fortress on day 5 and gets a polite greeting from Dina Luludora as she passes. Suddenly, A massive victory shout blasts through the halls and scares the life out of everyone on the boat. They whip around toward the noise, and Dine's eyes go wide as he realizes what's happening, asking if their master is finally back. They peek around the corner and find Takumi and Kinoshita celebrating like they just won big, but Karen is totally over it and demands to know what all the noise is about. He turns to them with a massive grin, looking super proud as he tells everyone congrats because he finally finished the toilet. He's super hyped as he waves them over, promising that everything turned out absolutely perfect. He shows off his ultimate masterpiece, a super shiny and perfectly built toilet. It's so flawless that it's literally glowing. While he brags about his creation, Karen and Dine he watches Karen and Din step into a room that's absolutely glowing. The walls and floor are sparkling with this crazy, holy light. Karen is totally stunned behind her glasses and asks if they... While Karen is totally lost looking at this, Dine just shuts her eyes and takes a deep breath, realizing the whole place smells exactly like a green tea diffuser. Kinoshita starts bragging again as he points to the shelf, explaining that no matter how much makeup they use, the whole supply just refills itself automatically. She explains it's just the powder room, which totally blows Din's mind because it's fancy enough to host guests in, but Kinoshita just tells them to go ahead and try everything. He points past the door with a huge flourish to show off the main event, the toilet itself, and tells them they better treat it with nothing but love. Kara Maxwell is totally losing it over how fancy this toilet is, and she's so stunned that her glasses start sliding right off her nose. Kinoshita doesn't even care about her reaction and keeps hyping up the device, telling them not to be scared since the lid opens by itself when you walk up, before grinning and calling it a straight-up hell machine. Karen tries to wrap up the tour and thanks him, but she's still totally reeling from what she just saw, while Dine is so hyped that she grabs Karen and demands they stay to check out every single thing. She's totally hyped and wants to mess around with the gadget even more, but Karen shuts her down with a super serious look. She tells Dine they have to study every detail for the king. He finally snaps and shoves both girls out of the bathroom, screaming at them to go handle their own drama. The toilet lid drops and the door clicks shut, leaving him in total silence to finally admit that he's totally hit his limit. While everyone outside is still whining and acting super salty, he's inside letting out a massive sigh of relief and patting his stomach, finally feeling totally relaxed. His chill vibes are totally ruined when Karen shouts through the door to ask if he's using the wonder himself, making a panicked Dine try to shut her up, while Kinoshi stammers that 15 minutes later, the bathroom door is cracked open, and Karen Maxwell is standing right there, looking totally rattled as she calls out with a shaky voice. She lunges forward and grabs Kinoshita's robes with a totally wild look in her eyes, screaming that there's no way he can use such an insane invention as a basic toilet. She grabs him tight, demanding to know how he built such a crazy invention and if he even realizes how serious this is, while a panicked Kinoshita stammers that he just copied toilets from his old. After a super awkward silence, she finally sighs and says they can use the bathroom whenever they want, leaving Kinoshi totally shocked as he asks if she's actually being serious. He flashes a huge grin and takes the deal, but he's got one catch. They have to promise to back him up if he ever gets into a mess. He's blushing hard while waiting for her answer, and Karen looks down at him, her face changing from pure shock to deep thought. She stands up tall with her hand over her heart, gives a confident grin, and introduces herself as Karen Maxwell, swearing she's totally loyal and has his back. The sun is beaming down on this giant white fortress tucked away right in the middle of some massive hills and thick woods. Inside those walls, there's a super clean bathroom where the toilet is literally glowing like it's magic. Takumi Kinoshita walks out of the room looking totally refreshed while drying his hands, giving a cheerful good morning to Karen and the dark-haired guy next to her. But Karen keeps things strictly professional when she greets him back. Karen's whole vibe flips, and she looks dead serious as she dumps a massive mountain of paperwork on the dark-haired guy, telling him he has to check and sign every single page before the day is over. He flinches back in total shock, grabbing her shoulder and begging her to stop, asking how he's supposed to know if any of this is true, but she just stays chill and tells he's totally freaking out, reminding her she's the one who said to call for help while pointing wildly at the papers and demanding answers. She keeps complaining, but Karen shuts him down, throwing her hand up with a totally drained look and demanding a 15-minute break before they do anything else. The worker stammers, asking what the point of all this is, because even though he's down to do the work, he's totally clueless about the reason behind it. Kara Maxwell hits him with a list of super weird rules. He has to use the bidet, scrub his hands, put on perfume, and only then can he actually use the bathroom. He looks down at the paper, but the words make zero sense, and he starts sweating as he wonders why the room is pitch black in the middle of the day. He looks up from the page and scans the massive empty room, standing all alone in a giant stone chamber until he suddenly realizes there aren't any windows. He spots a tiny opening way up on the wall. He grabs a long pole and shoves the shutter open. It's barely any light, but it's way better than being stuck. A thin ray of sunlight slices through the shadows, lighting up all the dust floating in the dark hallway. He's thinking about how much better the room would look with real glass windows when his face suddenly goes totally serious. A dark crystal spawns right in his hand as he clenches his fist. He blasted through the stone wall with a burst of power, but as he stepped out onto the ledge, he realized he was way higher up than he thought. Suddenly, two more people show up. A maid named Din Luludora bringing tea, and his co-worker Takomi, who's staring down at the massive drop in total shock, while Din just looks at them confused because she hasn't even noticed the giant hole in the wall yet. She stared in total shock as the hole in the wall kept getting bigger, while the guy next to her started screaming because he couldn't stop his own power from spiraling out of control. Kinoshita was shaking like a leaf, and even though Dine thought it was cute and told him to take a break, the dark-haired guy pushed through his panic and swore he'd finish the job today. Dine totally ignored his serious mood and snatched him up in a hug from behind, telling him to just chill for a second. He was caught completely off guard as she warned him to stay. Her playful mood totally vanished when she saw those weird crystals growing in the gap, and she suddenly realized he had no clue what this window was actually for. So when she asked about the stuff that looked like, he flexed his powers by turning the stuff into solid glass, explaining how it stays warm while Dine watched in total shock. But then she shyly asked him to put her down, making the sun peeks over a massive stone fortress, its giant walls and towers casting huge shadows across the rocky ground. Karen Maxwell marches through the halls and stops right at a door, looking totally serious as she gets ready to knock. She opens the door to find Takumi Kinoshita standing there with a huge, friendly smile. So she holds up her clipboard and starts making a super formal request. She stops mid-sentence when she sees what's behind him, her serious look totally vanishing as she stares in pure shock. That solid stone wall is completely gone, and now there's nothing but the blindingly bright, open sky. The whole office wall is totally gone, replaced by a massive open balcony where Kinoshita is showing off the view, while Karen stays frozen at the door, clutching her papers. He turns to her with a huge grin, asking what she thinks, and shouts that his office is finally perfect. He tells a shocked Kran to chill because it's not just some empty void, while she stays totally silent and fixes her glasses to wrap her head around the view. She reaches out to the invisible wall in total shock, and while he laughs and says it's cool, he admits he still hasn't figured out how crazy his powers really are. She turns to face him and asks super seriously if he can pull off that same trick in another room. Her eyes go wide with excitement as she asks if he's for real, and he just gives her a big grin, teasingly asking if she means right there in her room. He says he can't do it right this second, but give him a little time, and it'll be a total piece of cake. Karen gets all flustered and stammers out a thank you, but then he says he's going to handle the lighting and even prep a bath for her. She narrows her eyes with a total poker face, thinking hard about his massive offer. She turns to Takumi and addresses him super formally, totally catching him off guard as he stammers out a confused response. She offers to hook him up with a window first, if that's what he wants, but he shuts that down fast while daydreaming about fluffy creatures, telling her she's got it all wrong. She gives him a real warm smile and admits she totally misjudged him, realizing they all seriously underestimated what he can do. He gets super shy when she starts praising him, turning bright red and begging her to stop making it so awkward. She brushes off his nerves and leans in close, suddenly getting super serious as she asks him to head to the capital city, Rosalia, with her. She breaks down the deal, saying his inventions like toilets and windows would make him a total legend, and she's sure the king and the nobles would absolutely love his work. She finishes explaining the crazy rewards and asks if he's in, but he just stands there speechless because the deal is way bigger than he ever imagined. He stood there with his arms crossed, humming as he thought over Karen Maxwell's offer, knowing this was a massive decision that really weighed on him. Finally breaking the silence, he gave Karen a huge grin and told her he wasn't ready to leave yet because he still had a ton of big plans to finish at the fortress. Her eyes narrowed as she really thought about what he just said. Then her serious face totally melted into a kind smile, like she knew exactly what was up. She didn't even argue and just said, "As you wish," making Kinoshita flash a huge grin because he was hyped she was being so chill. He casually mentioned the view from the big windows was way better now, and while holding up a small gift, he pointed out that you could see every single thing happening in the office. Karen's low-key, worried that his changes might mess up their security, but he just turns back with a huge grin and tells her not to sweat it because he's already got everything figured out. He pulls out this tiny rectangular gadget and tells the confused Karamax, well, it's a secret tool, pointing right at the screen to explain what happens if he hits that button. One quick tap, and a loud metallic bang rings out as giant shutters slam down to cover the windows. The sudden darkness and loud noise leave Karen totally shook, her eyes wide with shock behind her glasses. He flashes a grin and tells her the device shuts the blinds automatically so he can work without any distractions. He's hyped up, explaining all 4 modes, like the light settings, and Karen's face goes from total shock to pure obsession because she's decided she absolutely has to have one. Sunlight floods through a massive window, lighting up every corner of this huge, modern room. Takumi Kinoshita stands by his desk and looks out at the mountains with a huge smirk, feeling totally hyped because he knows he absolutely nailed it. He's feeling chill, but then he gets right back to business, rubbing his chin and deciding the bathroom needs some windows too. He's weighing his options, trying to decide between a slatted window for the breeze or a solid one for the light, even though he knows the solid one won't open. Right as he's thinking about it, a see-through screen pops up out of nowhere with window diagrams, and he just stares at it, totally freaked out. His shock turns into a total aha moment as he realizes this must be some insane high-tech gear. but he's still tripping over where the screen even came from and notices it doesn't look very secure at all. He starts messing with the screen and realizes it's a massive catalog for fixing the whole fortress, showing him everything from floor tiles to bathroom sinks and paint colors. He's totally hyped by how awesome it is and wonders if this crazy system is actually part of his secret power. The next morning, Karen Maxwell greets him and immediately jumps into the schedule, making Kinoshita snap out of his morning daze and get back to work. He asked if they were heading to see the mayor, and she just held up a document and told him he was exactly right. Just thinking about his first official meeting sent his nerves through the roof. She saw he was nervous and warned him to stay glued to his guards. He was about to ask why when a huge scene broke out behind them. Some fluffy little monster was being chased by a crowd. She ignored the mess and told him the real, scary reason she was worried, explaining there's a wild rumor going around that hair from summoned people like him can cure any disease, and while they head over to a nearby town full of wooden houses sitting right at the edge of a massive forest. He looked out the window as they pulled up, saw the town, and asked Karen how many people lived there. Inside the carriage, Karen calmly read through a report saying the town had about 2,000 people, mostly diamond miners, and hearing about those mines totally caught him by surprise. She told him she only owned the fortress because the birth rate was so low, but as he looked out the window, he felt like there was a much bigger secret she was hiding. He was totally lost in thought until he suddenly noticed the townspeople. As her carriage rolled by, everyone started running away in total terror. One mum grabbed her kid to hide them, while he turned away from the window looking totally stressed by the cold welcome. But Karen just stood there looking completely unbothered. She noticed he was freaking out and told him that even though the locals are suspicious of summoned people, they won't actually hurt him, so he should just ignore them, which made him force a nervous smile and promise to try his best. Suddenly, total chaos breaks out right outside. A huge mob of angry locals has gathered, all of them screaming at one person standing alone. They're absolutely losing it, yelling for the curs. The whole crowd was turning their rage on this tiny, shaking kid with wild red hair and pointy ears, and he could only clutch his head while everyone screamed for him to get lost. While the kid shook in fear, Karen asked what was going on, but Takumi couldn't look away because he realized the boy was actually part of the Yolanov clan. That name belonged to a legendary clan famous for seeing the future and curing any disease. But while the West feared they brought bad luck, the East treated them like absolute legends. You could tell the locals were totally terrified when one guy shoved the Yulunov kid and screamed at them to get lost right now. The guy looked absolutely furious, while the poor kid scrambled on the ground, totally trapped by the scary crowd. He warned them that if talking didn't work, things were about to get ugly, so Kinoshita finally snapped and charged in, screaming for them to stop. He blasted right past a shocked Karen, who could only yell his name as she realized he was about to do something crazy. He jumped right between the scared kid and the angry villagers, stopping the guy in his tracks, while the Yulanov boy looked up at his savior, who was totally distracted by the kid's crazy hair color. He doesn't move an inch, while the crowd goes totally wild. And when a guy yells that the mountain is going to swallow them whole, everyone starts freaking out. People are screaming and running for their lives, leaving Kinoshita and the Beastkin kid standing all alone in the middle of the madness. The kid looks up, shaking with fear, and stammers out a thank you for the save, while Kinoshita looks down to see if they're actually hurt. Seeing them shake like that hits Kinoshita with a flashback of a talk he had with Karen Maxwell under a perfectly clear sky. He remembers this weird defense mechanism where people start laughing when they're terrified, and as he looks down at you shaking, he pictures a classmate who used to do the exact same thing. Realizing the kid is just scared out of their mind, he kneels down and introduces himself as Takuru Kinoshita, explaining they actually startled him first before asking for their name. The young beast girl looks up nervously and introduces herself as Sisha Mayoga, telling everyone she's 18. His eyes pop with excitement as he shouts that they're the same age, feeling an instant bond now that they finally have something in common. He just shrugs and says he already knows, while Sisha looks up from the ground in total shock, asking if he's seriously not scared that she's actually from the Yulan clan. She's getting even more confused and keeps asking why a great guy like him would ever bother being so nice to her. He crouches down to look her in the eye, flashes a friendly smile, and tells her the truth. He's actually from another world. He just laughs it off, saying everyone is already terrified of him, so he's not scared of her one bit. Then he breaks into a huge, genuine smile and says he's just really glad. That sudden, warm smile hits Sisha like a ton of bricks, making her heart race as her whole face turns bright red. She wipes her eyes, looking totally flustered, and when Kinoshita asks if she's a local, she tells him she's just a traveler out here gathering herbs. She's still totally shaken by what he said and tries to play it off, but Kinoshi spots her injury and insists on fixing it right then and there, making her face turn bright red as he gets super close. He asks if she's okay, but her legs just buckle, and she slams into the dirt before she can even say a word. Karen Maxwell watches from the side, thinking the girl is totally white. She laughs it off and tells her to chill since they're basically the same age, but looking at him now, he totally gives off the vibe of a high-class noble. Just as they start moving, Karen Maxwell walks up and calls Kinoshi master, telling him it's time to go, which totally shocks Sisha as she wonders who this lady even is. He points way up at a massive mansion on the hill and tells her it's his place, leaving Sisha totally stunned as she finally realizes he's a rich noble, and the woman is. A bit later, Sisha is totally passed out on the couch, and while Kinoshita is super worried about her, Karen says she's just wiped from the long trip and will be totally fine after some rest. He totally buys the story, so Karen tells him to let her sleep and heads to the bathroom while Kinoshita gives her a quick thanks. He just stood there, staring at the ground, trying to wrap his head around everything that just went down. He kept thinking back to that crazy moment. Right when Sisha collapsed, the staff jumped into action and carried her away. All they cared about was getting her some food, a hot bath. Snapping back to reality, he let out a sigh as it all finally clicked. Everyone is straight up terrified of the Yulinovs. Out of nowhere, this girl with long, light hair just popped up right in front of him, looking super freaked and kinda embarrassed as she suddenly yanked down her underwear. Kinoshita just stood there, totally stunned, mouth hanging wide open. Takomi Kinoshita swings open a bathroom stall door, only to find the maid, Dainlulu Dora, looking totally shocked and super embarrassed. They suddenly find something super awkward, and both start screaming their lungs out. She stops dead as it finally clicks that she was just in the bathroom too, and her face gets even angrier as she connects the dots, while Dine watches her, turning bright red from total nerves. Karen snaps as soon as she figures it out, grabbing the terrified maid by the collar while Dine stammers that she was just cleaning. But Karen gets right in her face and demands to know why she's using this off-limits room without permission. She tightens her grip, snapping that regular staff aren't allowed in this bathroom and accusing her of breaking the rules on purpose, while Kinoshita suddenly jumps in and begs Karen to listen, yelling that he's the one who gave her permission. Karen stares Dine down with a terrifying look, whispering her name for an answer, while Kinoshita panics in the background and tries to show everyone it's actually his fault. Takumi grabbed her in a tight grip with a super serious look, making her panic as she scrambled to explain She was just trying to help and totally had permission. She told everyone she was building a secret room and needed their help to make it perfect, even asking if Dinah should be involved. And Kinoshita jumped at the chance, promising the mystery project would be. He thumped his chest and promised Karen she could totally count on him. And after she finally agreed, he told both girls it was time to get out of there. He kept it simple and told them he just needed to use the bathroom, leaving both women staring at him in total shock. Deans suddenly leans right against him with a huge smile, making Kinoshita totally freeze up, while Karen just watches the whole awkward scene go down. Right outside another room, Sisha Mayuga is standing there, looking super nervous and blushing, when suddenly the door swings open and Kinoshita walks out with a tray. Dine pops up with a wink and asks for some tea and snacks, leaving Sisha totally speechless. Kinoshita gets all flustered when he sees Sisha pointing back at the room. With the drama over, Sisha Mayuga suddenly jumped as she realized she forgot something, quickly bowing low to thank them for saving her life. Karen Maxwell shot them a total death stare and told everyone it was time to get moving. Before they could even budge, Sisha's stomach let out a massive roar that caught everyone off guard, and she just froze there, looking totally horrified. The awkward vibe finally broke when Din Luludora showed up with a tray of tea, and Kinoshita told Sisha he needed to just chill out. He was being super nice, but she totally panicked and backed away, sweating like crazy and saying she didn't want to be a burden. She covered her mouth with shaking hands and finally admitted the super embarrassing truth that she hadn't eaten a single thing in days. Kinoshita led her over to a couch and handed her a sandwich with a kind smile, telling her to go ahead and eat as much as she wanted. Sisha finally took the sandwich with a soft smile, her bandaged hands shaking as she managed to stutter out a quiet thank you. She didn't even hesitate and just shoved the food into her mouth, taking a massive, desperate bite. The flavor hit her, and she started inhaling that sandwich so fast it actually freaked Kinoshita out, but you could tell by her eyes she was in total heaven. She's totally losing it, because the food tastes so good after she hasn't eaten in forever. Tears are literally streaming down her face as she yells about how amazing it is. Behind her, after she finally chilled out, Kanoshi leaned in and asked why an Oolong clan member was way out west when they're supposed to be in the east. She stopped eating for a second to explain that she was just following orders from the oldest Hash. She explained that her clan's priestess told her to head west to find her destiny. And apparently, this lady has special eyes that can see anyone, even if they aren't from the... She explains her powers are still leveling up, so she only gets blurry sneak peeks of the future, and Takumi is totally hyped by how insane that is. She gets a little embarrassed and admits she never expected her journey to end with her at this fortress eating such an awesome meal. Takumi's totally hooked now, so he leans in and asks her to read his fortune, wondering if she can see a future that isn't just about herself. He totally backs off and apologizes for being so pushy, but Sisha stops him right there, clenches her bandaged fist, and promises she's doing this just for him. While Dine and Karen watch from the sidelines, Sisha starts breaking down her process, explaining that different Oolong clans have their own ways of seeing the future, and some can even do it on command. She explains her way is totally different. She basically zones out into a trance and scribbles the prophecy down without even knowing what it means. She grabs a pen with a look of pure focus, ready to show him exactly what she's capable of. Her pen was a total blur as she scribbled the prophecy in a trance, her messy hair literally sparking with power as she wrote. She finally snapped back to reality and let out a huge sigh of relief, telling him she was done. So a worried Takumi took the paper and asked if she was okay before smiling at the The prophecy went on to say that with Takumi backing her up, Sisha was destined to create a legendary medicine. Words were literally writing themselves across the page, and Sisha was totally stumped, because even though she had tons of ideas for new medicines, she had no clue what this big master plan was all about. He read the next part about their deep bond, making Sisha turn bright red. But then the prophecy got way too personal by describing them getting spicy in bed, leaving Takumi stunned while everyone else gasped. Sisha was totally mortified and lunged forward to snatch the paper back, screaming that it was just total nonsense as she literally tried to shove the whole page into her mouth. After all that craziness, Sisha was just kneeling there feeling super embarrassed and saying sorry, but Takumi finally chilled out and told her it was all good. She told Takumi the whole story about her busted leg and how she was totally broke, while he and Karen Maxwell listened closely to her situation. Karen calls Sisha out for being a herbalist, and a shocked Sisha admits she learned it all from an elder, so Karen offers her a job on the spot, since they desperately need a magic user with her skills. Everyone was totally hyped, and Takumi told Ms. Karen she was a straight-up genius, but while Sisha was busy saying thanks, Takumi suddenly asked her if she wanted to make some serious cash by reminding her about the medicine they could create together. Bluster is totally bringing the hype. She asks him straight up why he's being so nice. He gives her a soft smile and says he sees a lot of himself in her, so the vibe was totally killed when Karen leaned in, sniffed Sisha, and straight up told her she smelled gross, asking when she last took a shower. While Sisha was dying, Sharon wasn't playing around and insisted Sisha look the part for the job, so she called in a red-haired maid named Dean to prep a bath while Sisha totally panicked, saying Dean didn't say another word and just started dragging the Sisha out while she kept apologizing. And as Takumi watched them go, he couldn't stop thinking about the word bath. Fresh out of the bath and rocking a robe, he sits at his desk to plan his next big move, flipping through a catalog to build a legit bathhouse. Suddenly, Daine Luludora shows up with Sisha, who's holding a candle and rocking a totally different outfit. The maid says she brought the light since it's getting. Between her crazy new look and everyone staring at her, Sisha totally panicked and let out a massive scream. As the room went pitch black, Daine tried to turn on the lights, but Takumi stopped her and said it wasn't time yet because he finally had something crazy to show everyone. He checked Sisha out again, telling her she looked like a totally different person and that her new outfit was perfect, which made her blush as she whispered a tiny thank you. Karen Maxwell bursts into the pitch-black room, demanding to know what Takumi is doing with two girls in the dark, but he's just super hyped that the sun finally went down. Everyone's finally together, but while Karen's acting suspicious and Sisha's shaking with nerves, Takumi just ignores the bad vibes and tells them to get ready for his new lighting system, holding up a little device and starting the countdown. He slams the button on his remote, and suddenly, a massive flash of light floods the entire room from above. Karen jumps back, her jaw literally hitting the floor in shock. Daine and Sisha. Karen Maxwell looks totally stressed, reading a document in a bright room, while her three maids, Daine Lulu, Sisha, and the girl with pigtails, stand at attention, and she suddenly whips out a riding crop and says she can see every bit of dust, making Kanoshi totally flinch. Daine tries to apologize and says it was too dark to see, but Daine lets out a sharp scream as Karen towers over her, telling the terrified maid that her punishment is just getting started, while Kanoshita watches in total shock, wondering if things have gone way too far. Karen steps up and locks eyes with Dean, coolly telling the head maid to get ready for a spanking. Before she can do anything, Kanoshita rushes in and yells for her to stop, but Karen just grabs him by the collar while he struggles, asking where she even got that whip, and shouting that a head maid should lead by example, not by scaring people. She grabs him tight with a stone-cold look and tells him to let go, claiming discipline only works if it's scary and painful. But Kinoshita snaps back that violence won't solve anything. His eyes go wide as the truth finally hits him, and he shouts that she's not teaching anyone a lesson. She's just using fear to control them, and that was her plan all along. He screams that he's banning her ways, but Kara Maxwell stays chill next to Dina Luludora and just asks him why. He explains his choice by remembering his teacher Nakamura's lesson that scary punishments just kill trust and stop people from growing, while we see a vision of Karen's terrifying anger crushing a crying Dai. He tells her that since Dean is his maid, he's the one calling the shots, and to his shock, Karen just taps her riding crop on her shoulder and gives in, saying, "Fine." But she's totally faking it, and with a smug smirk, Karen suggests a brand new punishment where Dine has to scrub every single soldier's toilet until they shine, making Kinoshita realize. A bit later, they're walking through the stone corridor when he says sorry to Dine for making things worse, but she tells him it's totally fine because she was just happy he was there for her. He stops and turns to her, saying he's got a genius plan to help her finally do her job right. And as Din watches him closely, he pulls out a small, rectangular gadget. One quick tap sends the device into a blinding explosion of light, leaving Dine totally stunned and shielding her eyes while Kinoshita watches with a proud grin. She flinches from the insane, blinding light, but Takumi just laughs and calls her dramatic, even though he admits the glow feels totally weird, while nearby, Karen and another maid clutch their chests with their hearts pounding from the shock. The whole room turns into a crazy, glowing stage as this fake sun blinds everyone, making Dine scream for mercy, while Karen and the other maid look like total shadows against the light. As the blinding light finally clears, the whole place is a total disaster zone. The maid with the pigtails sprints to Dine's side, but Dine just hides her face and grumbles about. Once the chaos finally dies down, the sun comes up and hits the massive fortress. Inside, the workday is officially kicking off with Karen Maxwell already at her desk, while way out in the forest, Din Luludora is wandering down a sunny path all by himself. Meanwhile, over in another office, Takumi Kinoshita kicks back with a huge sigh because he's finally finished for the day. His relief vanishes the second he remembers Dine is stuck scrubbing toilets, and he feels totally bad for her. But since he's her master, he knows he's got to look out for her. So he's chilling on his bed with his laptop, scrolling through a huge list and muttering that it's got to be here until he finally hits the cabinet section and knows the screen was absolutely packed with options, and he just stared at all the different cabinets, totally clueless about which one he should actually pick. He flashed a confident smirk and tapped the screen to lock it in, even though he knew Ms. Karen might totally chew him out for being so extra. Outside, everything was totally chill as birds flew right over the massive stone walls of the fortress. Suddenly, a happy voice from the door snapped him out of it as Dina Luludora popped in to say his bath was ready. His eyes lit up as he suddenly remembered it was finally bath day. He'd totally blanked on it, but he was so hyped for his first real soak since he got here that he's led into this massive steamy bathhouse where Dinah and a maid with pigtails are waiting. And when they point to a basket for his clothes, he just gives. He's totally speechless, just staring at the smiling maid with pigtails who suddenly appeared right in front of him. She breaks the silence to ask if he needs anything else, but before he can even answer, she says she's definitely helping him with his bath. He totally panics at her offer and yells that he can wash himself, but the maid is just confused, calmly explaining that helping him is her job, and that's just how things work there. He's still freaking out and asks if there's any way out of this, but the maid just gives him a cheerful nope, leaving him terrified that Karen is gonna lose it on him again. He's ready for another lecture, but the maid suddenly starts crying and begging him to change his mind for the sake of her skin, which totally overwhelms him until he gives in, only for her tears vanish in a heartbeat as she flashes a massive, winning grin. She shouts, "All right," and gets right in his face, telling him to take his clothes off. He turns bright red as she wastes zero time getting behind him to help him out of his robe, and as she offers to help, he starts sweating and blushing like crazy just from her being so close. He's a total mess, face turning bright red and sweating buckets as he stammers that this is way too embarrassing, and for him, this is basically pure torture. The total shame triggers a cringy memory from when he accidentally brought his sister's underwear to school instead of a handkerchief. And while he thought that was his peak embarrassment, this moment is actually, he yells at her to cut it out because it's super cringe having her do stuff he can do himself, and he even asks if she's gonna start washing his underwear next. He's totally winded after that huge freakout, and when the maid looks back from the door all worried, he just gasps out that he can't go through with it. He tells her it's not her fault and begs her to just close her eyes so she isn't so shy, but the maid teases him by peeking through her fingers and saying then her whole face changes to pure love, and she smiles softly, telling him she's only ever going to look at his shining face. Her words and that sharp look hit him like a bolt of lightning, making his heart race as his whole face turns bright red. He snaps his head up in a total panic, realizing he's basically naked with just a messy towel around his waist and sweat dripping down his face. The girl with pigtails looks back with a huge, winning smile, and it totally freaks him out. He's blushing like crazy, hiding his face, and just starts stuttering, asking, inside a steamy room, Takumi Kinoshita screams in total shock as his maid, Diane Lulu Dora, looms over him with a massive, scary lobster claw, making him yell out to ask what she's even doing. She looks down at him with her finger on her chin, totally confused why he's freaking out, and asks why he's so shocked since she's not taking everything off. She starts taking off her boots and dress, making Kinoshita's face flip from pure terror to total embarrassment as he wonders if this new situation is actually any better. She's rocking just some frilly underwear and flashes him a big, cheeky grin while calling him over. Line 438. Totally freaked out, Kinoshita hides his face in his hands and yells her name like crazy. Dine grabs his hand and leads him through the massive private bathhouse toward a sunken tub, making sure to warn him not to slip on the wet floor. He sinks into the hot water, totally blushing and looking away, hoping the steam hides everything, while Dine is just chilling and humming, telling him it's all good and to come closer. She complains the bath is way too small and suggests hitting up the public bathhouse in town for more room. But Dynastamina's mood flips instantly as she grips a washing stool with a look of pure disgust, shouting that public baths are totally gross, and the mere thought makes her sick, leaving Kanoshi absolutely stunned by her wild reaction. She tests the water in the wooden tub to make sure it's just right, and then tells him to hop in. He slides into the steaming water with a huge sigh, feeling the heat relax him instantly. He asks if the city bath is also heated, but Dine reminds him that just 6 people worked super hard to make this one happen. She explains they just use a stove for heat, and while she's heard magic can control the temperature, she thinks that only happens in a few super rare spots. He's totally stunned and asks where the water came from, So Dine explains she used both water and fire magic, making him realize this is no ordinary bath. And seeing him space out, before he can even blink, she's already behind him with a soapy sponge, scrubbing his back and asking if it feels okay. He's totally tripping over his words, but she doesn't even stop, moving her hands across his back like a total pro. He's splashing around in the bubbles, fighting her off, and yelling that he can wash his own front. Her face drops as she asks if he's being rude, but then she offers a wild choice. Maybe he'd rather get whipped instead. She lunges forward and grabs him in a huge back hug, laughing that he's just going to have to deal with it, while he screams in total shock and asks where she thinks she's taking him. He's totally freaking out and yelling for Dine to stop, telling her some spots are strictly off limits, while asking if she's just mad at him or if she even knows how to wash him right. 30 minutes later, the torture is finally over, and Dine just smiles and says he's all clean now, like it was nothing. Kinoshita is hiding under a towel, dying of embarrassment, and can barely squeak out a thank you because he knows she literally scrubbed every single inch of his body. Once he's feeling better, he asks Dine to come to his room tonight to see something special, and even though she's shocked he wants her there so late, she agrees and says she'll get ready. He's just drying his hair and agreeing to the plan, but Dine totally gets the wrong idea and turns bright red. She covers her mouth and calls him a little rascal, leaving him standing there, looking completely lost. Diana shows up at the door in a cute nightgown, looking totally flustered but hopeful as she calls out to her master. The door swings open, and she finds Kinoshita waiting, but Karen Maxwell and Sisha Mayogo are there too. Kinoshita is super happy she finally showed up, but Dain is totally confused why the other two are hanging out, especially when Kinoshita apologizes for the wait and mentions he even got a bed ready. She turns bright red, with embarrassment and rage, clenching her fists because she's so mad she actually got hyped for a private meeting with her master. He has no idea she's totally panicking inside, so he just gathers everyone around to announce a massive new product from his construction company. The whole vibe flips as Dine and Sisha lean in and start clapping with excitement, while Karen just sits there with her arms crossed, looking totally suspicious. He points super excitedly at something hidden under a sheet and tells them to check out their stylish new buffet. Kinoshita rips the sheet off for a big reveal, but it's just a basic wooden cabinet, leaving Dine and Sisha totally confused, while Karen just looks on, completely unimpressed. He makes a huge scene and says this is all for Dean, letting her open it first as a reward for scrubbing toilets all day, while she just stands there totally shocked and confused. She goes from totally confused to super happy in a heartbeat, crying tears of joy while thanking him over and over, and while a hyped-up Sisha crawls toward the cabinet, Karen looks. The doors click open, and the four of them peek inside, realizing it's actually a fridge packed with all sorts of weird-looking snacks and drinks. The whole squad loses it when Kinoshita reveals a fridge stuffed with insane snacks from his world, and even Karen can't believe her eyes. Dine points at a row of glass bottles and calls them cola, but he's totally weirded out by the dark liquid inside, so Kinoshita admits he was waiting to try them together before showing off some energy drinks that were Kabaka's absolute favorite. She spots a huge bottle of champagne and asks if it's the bubbly stuff, so Kinoshita gives a massive grin and tells everyone it's party time and they can help themselves to whatever they want. A moment later, the whole squad is huddled around a table piled with snacks, and as Kinoshita cracks open a big bottle of cola, saying it's been way too long, Din is already begging for a glass because he's so hyped to taste it. He asks the group what they want to drink, so Karen picks the champagne. But when he checks on Sisha, the little beastkin just says they're totally fine. Din hears that and immediately jumps at the chance for some champagne. So Kanoshi just smiles and tells her not to be shy, making her look up all embarrassed but super hyped as she says, sorry. He's totally shocked that a 10-year-old is trying to drink, explaining that back in his world you have to be 20. So when Dine tries to act like a grown, he flips the vibe and happily holds up his can, calling for everyone to grab a drink and celebrate together. The four of them lift their drinks over a table full of snacks and shout "bottoms up" as loud as they can. Dine takes one bite and totally loses it, screaming about how the flavor is literally exploding in her mouth, while Karen and Sisha are just as freaked out by the weird bubbly feeling, making Karen shouts that it's actually fire and a totally new flavor for her, while Dine is already begging for more, and Kanoshita just smiles, telling them to enjoy the mysterious fizzy drink sitting on the table. An hour later, the table is a total mess of empty bottles and cans, showing that the party is still going hard. The silence is totally wrecked when Sisha suddenly snaps and a stunned Kanoshita realizes she's actually wasted and acting nothing like her usual shy self as she clings to him, sobbing and apologizing for being so quiet. She stopped crying out of nowhere, yanked him close by his shirt with a super intense look, and Kanoshita was so shocked he could only stutter, while she demanded he listen to her. Her face was bright red as she leaned in close, staring him right in the eyes to finally whisper those three big words, "I love you." Kanoshita's face turned bright red from the shock, but Sisha just kept going, talking about his intense look and how he totally risked his life to save her. While she's talking, a memory suddenly clicks, and her face completely changes as she finally realizes exactly how she felt in that moment. Still totally shook and blushing, he looked down and managed to ask if they actually understood what was happening. He waited for her to explain, but Sisha just stared him down with wide, creepy eyes and swore she'd die for him, calling it a megaton of responsibility. The serious mood totally vanished as she got super wasted, slurring that if it's for her master, then it's only right, isn't it? Before he can even wrap his head around it, another girl leans in to tease him for his shocked face, while Sisha just totally passes out on his lap and starts snoring. She kept messing with him and admitted she actually loves causing drama, making a frustrated Kanoshita ask if she'd ever be there to help him out, but she just smirked, and Kanoshita is totally caught off guard when Karen Maxwell suddenly starts chugging a drink without saying a single word. She slammed her empty can onto the table and demanded another round with a dead, serious look, making Kanoshita break into a cold sweat as he realized she was a total alcoholic who definitely needed to stop. Karen totally lost it, screaming no and begging for more drinks like a little kid, while Kanoshita struggled to hold a passed-out Sisha and deal with the tantrum as the other girl just laughed at the whole mess. She's squirming to get away, but Karen Maxwell has a crazy strong grip on her as she begs for another drink, and even though he's pleading with her to stop, she nuzzles right up to him and starts purring, leaving Kanoshita so flustered he can only think about how much she's acting like a literal cat. Heron whispers for him to chill out, since she's still totally into him, while the short-haired girl nearby hides a giggle at how adorable they're being. The piece is totally wrecked when Sisha loses it, screaming she'll die for her master if she doesn't get another drink, while Karen starts wailing for someone named Dying. All that crazy weight slams them right into the floor, leaving them totally pinned under the three girls. Kanoshita starts screaming his head off, begging for literally anyone to come rescue him. Takumi Kanoshita snaps awake under the bright morning sun, realizing he's actually up way earlier than usual. He looks out the window at the gloomy clouds, thinking it's definitely gonna rain, then gives himself a quick pat on the butt and heads out. He's weighing his options, figuring it's too early for the stove, and he just needs shoes to handle the cold fields. But as he's shivering, two tiny fairy maids pop up. He spots General Paimon outside and shouts her name, so she turns back to ask how the master is doing before explaining she needs a hand moving some gear, promising her soldiers are just as elite as the capitals and thanking him a ton in advance. She says she's going to build another pile of rocks while Kinoshita watches from a rooftop and decides he's finally going to go talk to Paimon face to face. He heads straight into a massive mess hall where tons of soldiers are chowing down and shouting at long wooden tables. He swings the door open with total style, waving his hand and shouting a massive hello to the whole room. He stands right in front of the whole army, and they're all staring him down with pure terror because they're totally rattled by how he just showed up out of nowhere. He raises his hand, nervously trying to speak up and break the heavy silence. He finally speaks up and asks for some help with a mission, but that just freaks them out even more as the soldiers back away, whispering in fear, making him cringe at how awkward the whole... While the soldiers keep stuttering and looking away, a guy with long, wavy hair watches the drama from the side with a smirk, like he knows exactly what's up. Kinoshita let out a huge sigh inside, knowing this was going to be hard, but he never expected things to get this intense so soon. Just when he's about to give up, two guys step out of the crowd, a long-haired dude and his dark-haired friend, and they actually offer to help him. Kinoshita is so hyped that he bows as low as he can to show how thankful he is. The long-haired dude says he's Private Gustav and his partner is Private Bamps, but when Kinoshita introduces himself as Takru, Gustav just smirks because they already know exactly who he is. He brings up the rumor that Takomi Kinoshita eats people, but points out he looks like a regular guy, while his buddy Bamps is totally lost, questioning why people believe weird stories about Gustav. Gustav hands over a lock of his hair, but suddenly, Bams doubles over, looking totally pale. Kinoshita asks if he's all right, and Bams admits he's been feeling weak ever since he got wrecked in a recent fight. His partner just grins and calls Kinoshita "my lord," saying it's time to get started, and Kinoshita agrees, hoping their work really pays off. Bams stands tall and tells everyone he's officially ready to keep moving. Now that everything's settled, Kinoshita gets super hyped and drops his first order, telling Gustav and Bams to clear every piece of furniture out of the room while the two soldiers stand ready for action. Once the area is clear, Kinoshita drops to his knees and slams his hands on the floor, letting out a massive explosion of light that leaves Gustav and Bams totally speechless at their masters. This power is basically a super high-tech heating system. It pumps boiling water through a web of pipes hidden under the floor. The floor gets crazy hot, and that heat radiates out to turn. He remembered that brutal freezing cold and wished he could just open a portal to a hot country so he'd never have to feel a chill again. He knew his powers were basically cheat codes, so he just got right back to work. He turns to his new squad and gives them a salute to thank them for the hustle, but Gustav just brushes it off, while Bams tells Kinoshita to kick back and let them handle all the heavy lifting. He asks if he can hit them up for more work later, and with that out of the way, Kinoshita asks Gustav Rediliogris if they can spare some cash. He asks if they're busy, but a confused Gustav says they were just going to eat and crash, so Kinoshita jumps on the chance to invite them for a drink, totally catching both guys off guard. They're totally hyped now, and while Gustav keeps thanking him, Kinoshita just smiles and tells them to go ahead and grab some beer. A bit later, the three guys are hanging out at a table, just snacking and vibing over some canned drinks. He grins as they take their first sip, and Gustav's eyes practically pop out of his head because the beer is so smooth and not bitter at all, while Bamps says the three guys chill out at a low table, snacking and drinking while soaking up the good vibes. As the night wraps up, Gustav and Bamps are super grateful, telling him they totally owe him one and to hit them up soon, so he just smiles as they head out, happy they had a blast. Now that he's finally alone, his empty room goes back to being dead silent. He drops straight to the floor, not because he's tired, but because he's in total heaven. His hands sink right into the super soft, fuzzy carpet. It's a cozy feeling. His chill vibes are totally ruined when a voice calls out from the door, and there's Kara Maxwell looking down at him, asking what he's doing as he looks up and says her. He props himself up with a massive grin, bragging about the floor heating he installed to keep the room warm. But when he tells her to try it out, Karen just looks down and tells him to take. Her eyes went wide the second she felt the surface under her, and she turned bright red as she shouted, "Whoa, it's actually warm." Meanwhile, he's just chilling on the carpet with a smug look, asking her what she thinks and saying this tech is super common where he's from. He even pointed out a pillow and showed her a warm spot, telling her she should totally try taking a nap right there. She froze for a second, wondering if he really wanted her to lie down right then, before she slowly lowered herself onto the pillow. The second her head hit the pillow, she let out a surprised yelp because it felt way better than she expected, and he just watched her with a huge grin, asking if she was comfy and bragging that it's good for way more than just sitting. She was totally speechless, just letting out a breath in awe as she tried to wrap her head around this crazy new feeling. She finally chilled out and admitted it was actually super comfy, looking at him in total awe as she realized his world must be filled with all kinds of crazy gadgets. She's totally out cold and looking super comfy on the warm surface, while Takumi just stands there staring and sweating, wondering what he's supposed to do now. He wanted to have a drink ready for her when she finally woke up, so he headed over to the mini fridge to see what he could find. He figured champagne was the perfect choice. He turns back with a drink, only to find her wide awake and staring, and even though she tells him she remembers everything and he shouldn't rush, a totally flustered Kinoshita insists that this whole mess literally just started. She sat up fast, clutching her blanket and snapping, "Me? Is this some kind of joke?" While Kinoshita's face just went blank as he realized she totally forgot everything they just talked about. Before he can even blink, she lunges at him for a massive hug, yelling about the floor being evil and how much she loves his knees, leaving a panicked Kinoshita begging her not to. Her face was totally red as she leaned in close, whining about the heat. And Taku was horrified when she started pulling down her sweater to show off her black lace, begging him to help her get undressed because she was sweating so much. Takumi Kinoshita stretches as he wakes up, groaning the second he remembers last night and muttering about how it was a total disaster. He gets a sudden flashback of Karen Maxwell holding him close, and his face turns bright red as he remembers all the spicy stuff they did together. He pushes the sad memories aside and thinks about a hot bath, but it's way too expensive and takes too long. So when his stomach growls for breakfast, he realizes that since the toilet is finally fixed, he can finally eat and feel like a normal person again. Seeing all that food gives him a total light bulb moment. Maybe he can just get someone else to cook him breakfast. He's just standing there when a sudden clatter nearby makes him jump, and he freezes, wondering what the heck that was. He heads over to the door and calls out to see if Dean is busy. He swings the door open and peeks into Din the Lidor's room, shouting, "Din, you in here?" But the whole place is dead quiet. He walks right into Liladora's room while she's getting ready, catching her totally off guard. But she quickly plays it cool and asks how he slept. He explains that he rang the bell for breakfast and only came looking for her when she didn't show up, And while he feels bad for barging in, she's the one apologizing for missing the signal. That apology makes everything click, and he suddenly shouts that he totally messed up, leaving Dine super confused as he remembers he sealed his rune door shut to stop a draft, making the whole room completely soundproof. Dine is totally freaking out and asks what the plan is, but then Kinoshita gets a huge brain blast and tells everyone he's got this covered. Design just stares back, her brain basically turning into a giant question mark. He looks out at the common area, spots Gustav and Bams, and yells that he needs their help one more time. The two soldiers are totally down for it, so Gustav just smirks and says it's no big deal while Bams cracks his knuckles, ready to get to work. With the squad backing him up, Kinoshita gets geared up and looks ready to finally end this noise problem once and for all. He shows off his big fix, a built-in comm system, and now he can finally talk to them for real. Sisha Mayoga shows up with a list of demands and asks what's going on, so while Gustav and Bams work behind him, Kinoshita happily explains they're rushing to build a communication device, leaving Sisha completely lost. He breaks it down, explaining it's a device for talking across huge distances, and Sisha gets super hyped, asking if she can chat with anyone in the world, which totally flusters Kinoshita as he tries to explain it's not that easy. His brain is moving a mile a minute as he realizes he can totally build a radio tower and a control room. But since he's missing a switchboard, he starts thinking walkie-talkies might be his best bet. Sisha snaps him out of his head to ask if he's okay, but he tells her he's fine and to just focus on the comms, while Gustav and Bams start stressing out, with one saying it's impossible and the other calling their boss a total legend. A single finger slams right onto the button. He grabs his laptop, looks at a stunned Sisha, and drops his golden rule. Start small and just keep grinding step by step. He figured his new comms should work, but he had to test it first, so he asked Sisha if she could help him out for a sec. He leads her into a private room. He explains that he needs to check if the intercom is working right. He tells her to grab the phone on the desk if she hears a sound. He really hopes. He showed her how to hold the device and told her it was easy, but Sisha got super nervous and started stressing that she'd mess it up. He gave her one last pep talk and said he was counting on her before heading out, leaving Sisha all alone and super nervous next to that weird machine. He headed back to his room and sat at a desk that looked exactly the same, hitting a button to start the call while he waited for them to pick up. The phone stayed dead silent, and he looked super worried, wondering if she was ghosting him or if the message just got lost. Suddenly, he hears a click on the phone, and his face totally lights up with relief as he shouts, "Hello, it's me, Takuru." He presses the phone to his ear and calls out for Sisha, but all he hears is creepy static, making him think the signal just died. The static suddenly snaps into the sound of heavy, panicked breathing, and his face instantly drops with worry. Sisha is totally freaking out on the other end, gasping for air and wondering if she's hearing things since his voice is clear as day, but he's nowhere to be found. So Kinoshita tells her to just breathe and calm down before he can even figure out what's going on. She follows his lead and takes some deep breaths to stop shaking, and once he sees she's finally chill, he asks if she's feeling better. Her panic turns into total amazement as she shouts that she can hear him perfectly. His voice is so crisp, it's like he's standing right next to her, and Kinoshita finally breathes. Sisha peeks over her desk and says, "This is actually super handy, since not seeing his face makes it way easier to talk." And he just laughs, because she's totally right. The test is finally over, so he calls it a wrap, and thanks Sisha for all her help, while she stands there, holding the phone, with a proud look on her face. She's totally tripping over her words, because she's so hyped up, while Takumi stares at his phone in shock, asking if the call is already over. She's so hyped that she bolts to the roof to celebrate her successful test under the open sky. Back at the office, Kinoshita calls Lillador's room to check in, but his eyes go wide when he hears a voice he definitely wasn't expecting. A super loud and cheerful voice blasts through the phone as General Arietta Paimon of the Western Corps introduces herself, leaving Kinoshita totally frozen in shock. She stands right next to a totally stressed-out Lulu Dora, explaining that Karen told her about the new comms system, and she just had to try the fun gadget for herself. Suddenly, her smile disappears, and she gets super locked in, telling him they need to talk about something major. Kinoshita matches her serious energy and gets straight to the point, asking the one thing that matters: how many internal lines can this system actually handle? He listens closely, and his jaw drops in shock because General Payman's request for 1,000 phones is totally insane, and he knows right away that setting them all up at once is literally impossible. He totally loses it and screams into the phone, calling her out for changing the deal, yelling that even with his new magic boost, he still doesn't have enough juice. But she finally realizes how massive the plan is, while Kinoshita just slumps in his chair and begs for mercy, swearing he doesn't have enough mana for something that huge. He asks what she's even talking about because he can tell the mood just shifted. General Paimon gets dead serious and finally reveals what she's really up to. She needs every single. Now we see why she's in such a rush. Every full moon, a massive army of goblins, orcs, and flying monsters swarms in from the north. That word keeps looping in his head until he finally stammers monsters into the phone, sounding totally stunned. General Arida Paimon gets dead serious and tells Takumi she needs a private line. But when she mentions the full moon is almost here, Takumi loses it and asks why that's such a big deal. She's in a huge rush because this same thing happens every single month whenever the moon is full. Demons are swarming from the north, and she's looking totally locked in as she remembers that massive wave of goblins, beastmen, and flying monsters. She asks for the comms line again because of the danger, and Kinoshita finally gets it, realizing this setup lets them react instantly if they get attacked. She pressures him to start right now, knowing their scouts are about to flood them with a ton of info that needs to be handled ASAP. They finally realize how serious this is and ask the one question that matters: when is the next full moon? They've only got 11 days left, and Kinoshita's face goes totally serious as he realizes they're almost out of time. He rubbed his chin while thinking about the bad news, and it finally clicked. That full moon was a huge sign that time was running out, so he decided to start his mission right then and there. He dove straight into the fortress blueprints, tracing the layout to map out exactly where the new connections needed to go. Everything gets interrupted when two soldiers burst in, loudly announcing themselves as Private First Class Gustav and Bamps, reporting for duty just like they were told. He looked up and thanked them, but he was confused because he thought they were still low rankers. Gustav flexed that they were officially vassals now, and Bams was super hyped to confirm they finally got that promotion. Nishida gives them a big congrats, and Bams is totally losing his mind with joy because he never expected a promotion, while Gustav stays chill and says they're ready to help. With his new crew ready to roll, he put them to work right away, pointing at his notes and telling them the first goal was hooking up the comms to the main switch. He starts mapping out the whole fortress, circling exactly where the comms lines and the main control hub are hidden. The massive scale of the job is really hitting him, and he grits his teeth while muttering about how insanely complicated this whole thing is. He shows the massive blueprint to his new crew, and their heads start spinning when they see all the marked spots and realize just how huge this job really is. Seeing them worry, Takumi explains that even though there's no cell service, they can turn a phone into a radio with a special antenna, and his crew gets totally hyped to make it happen. And just like that, the real grind starts as the three guys dive in, lugging gear, hauling books, and stringing wires all over the fortress exactly how Takumi tells them to. Takumi is totally wiped out after a brutal day of work, but a bubbly maid with long hair catches him and calls him cute for being so exhausted right before he faceplants onto the bed. He's laying there, totally wiped out, when the maid leans over with a huge, energetic smile and asks if she can help him get undressed. She walks in to find another maid with pigtails trying to strip a totally freaked out Takumi, so she calls his name and shows him the cup she's holding. She stuttered through an excuse, explaining she just brought over some tea made from healing herbs. He crashed back onto the bed, eyes barely open, wondering why they'd even offer him tea when he's this exhausted. As soon as he smelled that tea, he felt a sudden burst of power, and the maid explained it's actually a special drink that helps you recharge your energy. She looked at him with total hope and asked if he'd give it a try, while the other maid watched her lean in close and insist on helping him drink it. He watched with totally exhausted eyes as she reached out to gently catch his head. She gently lifted him up to help him drink, and Takumi was totally blushing from being so close, thinking about how beautiful she looked even while he was completely helpless. He's just chilling in bed when another maid tells Sisha to give him a drink, so she carefully blows on the steaming cup to cool it down before handing it over. When she held the cup to his lips, his whole face turned bright red. He felt totally helpless, like a little kid being taken care of. Sisha just smiled and told him to. He tilts his head back and gulps it down while the maid keeps her hand steady to help him out. He chugged the whole thing down, feeling a wave of warmth rush through him and bring his exhausted body back to life. Sisha noticed his cup was empty and leaned in close, looking totally serious as she asked him how he was feeling. With his strength finally returning, he looks her right in the eyes with a soft smile, says her name, and thanks her for saving his life. He just chuckled and told her it was plenty, but Sisha stood by the bed, apologizing, saying she would have made more if she hadn't run out of tea leaves. Somewhere else, Sisha and a maid with braids are cracking up and having a total blast together. Right there, Gustav is just standing with his back turned, looking totally scary and not saying a single word. Takumi walks into the office feeling totally recharged and greets Karen at her desk, who asks if he's finally feeling better. He just flexes his arm with a huge grin, shouting that he feels better than ever. Karen looks up from her paperwork and tells him he's totally right. Those herbs and that tea really did the trick. So now she's got to go check on the collection reports. She explains that the plant is called Bregant, and Karen admits she's the one who sent Sisha to grab it, thanking him and promising to hit him up if they find any more useful stuff. Takumi gets dead serious and asks Karen to keep Sisha safe, which triggers a terrifying flashback of a little girl screaming in the shadows. So they decide they need a guard and pick Gustav, who steps up and takes the job. The memory hits him hard as a wooden door blasts into splinters, with Takumi leaping out carrying a passed-out girl while Gustav stands there totally stunned by the massive explosion. Suddenly, his past flashes before his eyes. A scary fall, a girl with reddish hair giving him a flower, and his maids, Sisha, Dine, and Karen Maxwell, all staring at him like he's in some kind of contest. The memory fades, and he's suddenly hit with total exhaustion, so Gustav and Bams have to carry him while they talk about how insane the day was. They carefully tucked him into bed, and as the soldiers headed out, they wished the maids luck and left him in their hands while he was so drained he could barely even think about crashing. Now that he's finally resting, Sisha and Din Lulu Dora start totally obsessing over him, with Sisha thinking his tired face is super cute, while Din completely loses it, screaming that he'll die without her and that she's the only medicine he needs to survive. Karen Maxwell was trying to go over his daily routine, but the fans were making such a huge scene that she finally snapped and told them all to pipe down. Even with all the chaos, he's still totally focused, and while he knows this is just part of the job, he lets out a little laugh because there's no way he shouted over to Karen, who was finally looking hyped and full of life again. When she asked about his new security cameras, he just gave her a wink and told her she'd have to wait until tomorrow to find out. He had to move fast, though, because there were only 8 days left until the full moon. Karen Maxwell is grinding away at her report with a massive fortress looming in the background, and she is totally locked in. The report breaks down the meeting with General Arita Paimon, where she explains that all the internal drama is actually the secret weapon they need to win the next big battle. The report says Takumi Kinoshita is pushing himself way too hard, so he's taking a break to let his body and mind finally recover. She finishes that last stroke and finally wraps up the whole report. This suggestion wasn't random at all, because everyone remembered Kinoshita looking like a total wreck, panicking and begging for help while he was completely overwhelmed by his work. After hearing her report, a super-hyped Kinoshita shouts her name and waves goodbye before heading out with Sisha and Dean, who are all wearing massive grins. She watches them head out from her desk, looking totally lost in thought as she wonders what it actually means to finally get some rest. She hits Takumi Kinoshita with a huge, creepy smile and asks how he's doing, which totally catches him off guard as he looks up from his bed. He lets out a little laugh as that tea finally kicks in and drops his fever, while she sits right by his side to check his temperature. He turns to her all worried and asks if she's okay, and even though she insists she's fine, like always, he can tell she's totally lying. He gets totally flustered and asks why she's looking so lovey-dovey, wondering what on earth happened to make her smile like that so early. She gets right in his face and tells him with total intensity that her smile is meant to heal his heart, leaving him completely stunned and barely able to speak. He realizes she's only smiling to keep his spirits up, so he thanks Karen and promises to get better fast so he can get back to work. With the hearing finally over, she touches her cheek and smirks, knowing all that hard work was totally worth it. General Arita Paimon is right in the middle of a busy command room with her crew, and even Takumi Kinoshita is finally back on duty. She walks right up to him with Gustav, Bamps, and her soldiers by her side, looking super worried, as she tells Takumi he looks totally wiped out. The general mentions she heard he hasn't stopped working for even a second, but Takumi just shakes his head and tells her he's totally fine. His whole vibe flips, and his eyes start glowing as he shouts that he's leveling up right now, promising to be even better tomorrow. He leans in with a crazy look in his eyes and tells the confused crowd his next big plan. They're installing monitors. He calmly explains that this screen lets them see everything happening outside while they stay totally safe behind their walls. Everyone is speechless until General Paimon starts screaming in total shock, and while she stares him down, Takumi actually starts laughing, while his own crew looks just as confused. She shakes off the shock and flashes a fierce grin, shouting that this gear is going to give them a massive edge. He's totally sure of himself, and since she's cool with any changes he wants to make, Takumi, Gustav, and Bams are all huge smiles and ready to celebrate A little while later, Karen Maxwell shows up with his order, and he's totally stoked to finally grab those hard hats from her. Now, rocking a hard hat and a work jacket, he doesn't waste a second as he pushes his team to sprint down the long hallway. They finally made it to their spot, deep inside the fortress complex. Standing in front of a wall of monitors in his brand new control room, he thanks everyone for coming and gets ready to show off the security cameras. She turns around with a confident smirk, ready to start the show, while General Paimon watches with her arms crossed, doubting if these flimsy-looking gadgets can actually survive a real fight. Just as the demo starts, the wall of monitors suddenly flickers to life, and an old officer with a mustache freaks out because the images are actually moving. General Paimon is totally losing it, but Takumi just stands there like a boss and confirms that the footage on the screens is actually happening live. He points to the control panel and explains they've got 12 cameras all over the fortress walls, with these screens showing the live feed from every single one. He flashes a confident smirk and points right at one screen, telling everyone to watch this part really closely. The screen shows a clear shot of a rocky area far away. Two people are standing there holding massive flags flapping in the wind. Everyone watching starts whispering and wondering if those are actually flags. He casually tells everyone to look over at the first screen. General Paimon and the officer lean in close as a hand points out a hidden detail on the screen they totally missed. Her jaw hits the floor in total shock when she sees a crystal-clear live feed of her very own fortress walls right there on the screen. While she's staring, Takumi, still rocking his hard hat, is super hyped to hear what she thinks, showing her a screen where two of her soldiers are holding flags on top of the wall. He can't even finish his sentence before General Paimon lunges forward and grabs his hands, her shock turning into pure hype as she screams that this is way more than just helpful. She's gripping him tight and leaning in with sweat on her face, asking if he realizes how huge this is for their defense, while Takumi is totally caught off guard by her crazy intensity. Before he can even wrap his head around her question, she turns to her crew and shouts that this new system is a total game changer, making everyone go wild, while one guy screams that he's 100% on board. While everyone's celebrating, Takumi is blushing like crazy, but he's actually got one more secret to drop about a hidden feature on the camera. He turns to the controls, sweating bullets, as he tells them to wait a sec, while General Paimon and Kara Maxwell watch his every move as he sets up the demo. After she finally chills out from all that hype, General Paimon clears her throat with a loud cough. She looks Takumi right in the eyes with a super serious thank you, telling him that having these cameras and comms is going to make their future fights way easier. He's super hyped as he tips his hard hat, promising to show them how the new system works, and the general is totally down for it. Gustav and Bams are watching nearby, and when Bam says it looks like they pulled it off, Takumi just smiles and says he's happy he could help out. Gustav is totally blown away because even though Takumi is skinny, he's working like two people at once, making him the perfect boss for their fortress. General Paimon cuts in to ask if the camera works in total darkness, and Takumi freezes up, admitting he's not 100% sure if the picture will stay sharp. She's playing it smart and warns her squad that these monsters always strike at night, so while a full moon gives them enough light to fight, bad weather would leave them totally blind and in huge. She's totally stressed because even with all those fires, the monsters can still see them in the dark. But Takumi just stares at his screens and promises the new lighting system will be ready in 5 days, right before the full moon. He swears this new system is going to be way brighter than the lights in their own rooms, but the general just gives him a skeptical look because she won't believe it until she sees it for herself. The general starts grilling him about the lights, saying basic street lamps just won't cut it, while Kara peeks at his screen and warns that his best option won't cover nearly enough ground. While he's thinking about what they said, a wild idea suddenly hits him. His eyes light up as he points at the screen, shouting that he's finally found the answer, while everyone else crowds around in total shock. Days fly by until the full moon finally rises, lighting up the whole world with its pale glow. That night, Takumi Kinoshita is super nervous, sitting on a bench with Sisha and Dainulu Dora by his side, while Kara Maxwell guards their backs, all while a huge army of armored. He's just standing there when the intercom suddenly buzzes to life. A soldier shouts that the enemy is coming from every direction and they're moving in to fight. It's finally happening. Right as he's freaking out, a huge pack of monsters roars under the moonlight and sprints straight for the walls, and he realizes right then they're finally here. Under a sky full of stars, this massive fortress stands perfectly still, looking sharp, powerful, and totally untouchable. Inside, the whole place is buzzing as everyone gears up for the big fight, with soldiers strapping on heavy shields while Karen Maxwell briefs a small group in the hallway where a super-nervous Edvard Koch, General Arita Paimon, steps up and tells Edvard to get to the safe zone with a confident grin. But he stays glued to his seat and just looks right back at her. He gets a look of pure determination and refuses to leave, arguing that even if it's just for show, he's still a lord who's staying to watch, which makes everyone's getting super hyped. But a dying Lulu Dora leans in to whisper that his legs are shaking despite his tough act, giving him a creepy smirk as she offers to hold his hand. Before anyone can react, Karen Maxwell jumps in and tells everyone to find cover, promising to send word if anything changes. The maids totally ignore her, though. Din is hyped to stay just to watch. The madness stops instantly when Karen tells everyone to shut up, her face looking dead serious as she drops the news that they're already here, leaving the whole group frozen in total shock. He pointed a single finger toward the horizon, making Edvard Koch and his maids Dine and Sisha look out with a mix of nerves and total curiosity. Far across those dark hills, a massive, swirling shape started to rise up and take over the landscape. That noise turned into a massive wave of monsters of every shape and size, all charging forward to cause total chaos. Edvard's jaw dropped because he couldn't believe just how huge this army. He flinched as this gross goblin monster with a long tongue lunged straight at him, its eyes looking totally insane. The truth finally hit him like a truck, and he could barely even whisper as he realized the whole army was made of those monsters, making his stomach flip with pure fear. Suddenly, a soldier nearby screamed into his radio that there were 30,000 enemies, and Edvard's face went totally pale when he realized just how many of them were coming. She gasped in shock as her body went stiff from the news, while Edvard realized that if an army that massive attacked, even this legendary fortress wouldn't stand a chance. The fortress is bracing for impact when General Arietta Paimon screams for her archers to get ready, and even though they're all wearing blindfolds, they pull back their bows in perfect sync. General Paimon screams from the fortress walls, ordering her troops to get right in the faces of those bird monsters and blast them out of the sky. She's totally freaking out as the fight gets super intense, but Edvard Koch stays dead silent, just staring ahead and thinking. He breaks the silence by calling her General, and she whips around, looking totally caught off guard. He tells her to signal when her squad is ready to fire, promising he'll be the one to turn on the lights, and she totally gets the plan and agrees. A massive beam of light blasts out of the fortress, tearing through the dark straight at the monster. Edvard and the general watch from the wall as the beam slams into its target, while Karen and Sisha see the whole crazy scene unfold right next to them. The panic is totally gone, and now she's locked in, staring down the battlefield with a look that says she's ready to win this. She screams over the total madness, giving the signal to fire up the device right this second. The second she gives the order, Edvard Koch slams his hand onto the switch and forces the machine to start. Suddenly, a massive wave of white light explodes from the fortress, blinding everyone on the entire battlefield. Out of nowhere, a massive flash of light blinds everyone on the field, making both the monsters and soldiers freak out. And even General Paimon is totally stunned as she realizes this is the exact. Edvard shouts out an update from his spot, confirming the enemies are totally frozen by that light. Her shock vanishes instantly as she locks in, screaming for every unit to get ready to fire. They give the order to fire, and a massive wave of arrows rains down from the walls right onto the confused girl who has no way to defend herself. As the blinding light on the battlefield finally clears, a massive horned monster groans while trying to see straight, just as a tiny goblin nearby looks up and screams because the sky is suddenly black with incoming arrows. He didn't even get to finish his scream before the arrows hit, and one slammed into a monster so hard it sent him flying backward. The command center is pure chaos as reports flood in about monsters swarming Zone 16, forcing the 4th squad to move out, while the 7th squad screams they're out of arrows, and Kara Maxwell asks the 2nd squad what other supplies they need to stay in the fight. The officer gets a ping about a massive monster swarm in Zone 32 and immediately orders the majors to move in. Edvard Koch is standing there smirking because all the gear is working perfectly, so the officer tells the 5th Mage Squad to head out to the zone right now. Outside, the massive fortress stands tall, its flags waving in the wind to show the enemy they aren't backing down. General Arietta Paimon stands way up high, staring down at the battlefield with super sharp eyes to figure out exactly what's going on. Her voice blasts across the courtyard to hype up the troops, and when she calls for a victory shout, the whole fortress explodes into one massive roar. The whole place explodes with noise, and Edvard Koch looks around in total shock, seeing just how hyped his soldiers really are. He's stoked that everyone made it back in one piece, but he can't help but wonder if things were really okay enough to be celebrating. That's when it finally hits. He squeezes his fist, feeling a massive rush of excitement as his friends' cheers match exactly how hyped he is about their win. While the party's in full swing, General Paimon walks up with a huge smile to thank him, admitting she never thought they'd actually win without losing a single person. She grabs his hand tight and laughs, calling this the craziest case she's ever seen as she thanks him again, while he just beams and says he's happy he could help out. Back at the command center, the cleanup is finally starting, and one operator tells the rookie to go get some rest, since that was their first real taste of battle. She laughs and reminds the general that it was his first fight too, making a super embarrassed Edvard admit he was actually freaking out and at his total limit. Her face softens as she looks him right in the eyes, telling him he did an amazing job and calling him Lord Takaru. He's totally frozen in shock, his eyes popping wide as it finally hits him. She actually just called him by his real name. He's totally frozen in shock, but Paimon just smirks and asks why she can't talk to him like a friend after all the insane battles they've fought side by side. He went from totally shocked to blushing like crazy as he stuttered out a yes, so the general called it a done deal while Karen, Sisha, and the crowd cheered, especially when Paimon told everyone they could just use her nickname. Edvard shook her hand with a determined grin to seal their new deal, telling General Arita he was hyped to keep working with her. The village is still wrecked from the fight as everyone patches up the injured on messy cots, while high above, a flag waves over a massive new white wall built right into the mountains as a hand. Edvard Koch flashes a huge grin and an OK sign to the guys below, announcing that the whole inspection is finished and everything looks solid. Gustav stares up at the massive gate in total shock, telling his crew that their master is seriously on another level for building it this fast. He marches up and slaps Edvard on the back, calling the whole setup a massive win, while Edvard just stands there in his hard hat, looking super flustered and laughing awkwardly. Suddenly, the piece is totally wrecked by the sounds of a massive fight. Right outside the walls, soldiers are throwing down with giant monsters, and the ground is shaking from the force of it all. Edvard, he asks Gustav what's going on, and looking out at the massive pile of monsters, Gustav explains they have to burn all the bodies before they rot and spread a deadly plague. Edvard points at the soldiers and asks why they don't just burn the bodies, but Gustav looks at him like he's totally insane for even suggesting it. Karen Maxwell cuts him off to say a merchant is here to see him, but Edvard sees her stressed face and asks if something is up. Before she can even speak, Gustav jumps in to explain she's the official delivery person for the castle, but Edvard is totally lost and just keeps muttering merchant and supplier to himself. Back in the big hall, the group starts talking it over, with Edvard wondering what the merchant is really up to, while Gustav guesses he's just there to trade for some salted meat. Aaron explains his theory that cheap meat is actually a special item traded in massive amounts once a month, leaving Edvard so shocked he can barely get a word out. His worst nightmare is finally confirmed. That meat is actually from the monsters, and Edvard screams as the realization hits him that monster meat is totally edible. Gustav all smiles as he points to a wagon loaded with meat, bragging about how they use every single part, even the guts for sausages. And he tells Edvard it's delicious in a stew, but Edvard just watches the soldiers and thinks about how much crazy hard work this must be. He says it's true and explains how much of a grind it actually is. You have to drain the blood, butcher the meat, soak it in salt water, and then let it dry. A soldier explains that the river is totally trashed by mine waste, so they're stuck using wells, and with all this extra meat to process, the water shortage is becoming a massive nightmare. He lets the news sink in, realizing this massive holdup is going to be a huge problem for their plan. He snaps out of it when he sees more soldiers dragging in a massive new monster corpse. This place has some seriously strict rules about what comes first. Dealing with all that monster meat is the most. Seeing how much they struggle for water makes him feel pretty guilty about his easy life back in Japan, where he never had to worry about it. Karen Maxwell suddenly snaps him out of his thoughts to ask about the. Karen Maxwell leads Takumi into a massive, sun-drenched room with a killer view of the mountains, and as she waves him in, he can't help but wonder what kind of person he. Off to the side, a girl in a dark hooded dress jumps in surprise and bows low, apologizing for making everyone wait. She looks up, looking pretty surprised, but Takumi just gives her a friendly grin and says he's Takeru Kanoshita, the lord of the castle. She bows again and says it's awesome to meet him, introducing herself as Phoebe Bore from the Bore Trading Company. Phoebe's totally shocked since she expected the castle lord to be way older, but Takumi just gives a nervous laugh and admits he's still a total newbie who needs her help. Phoebe just smiles back and says she's also brand new to running her family business, so she's actually the one who should be asking him for a favor. As they get comfortable, an assistant quietly pours 2 cups of steaming tea and sets them right on the table. Once the snacks are served, Phoebe gets right to it, explaining that while the Bore Company's main base is in the capital, they're only in this area to score some diamonds and salted meat. He's looking totally lost and asking what's going on, while Phoebe Bore hides a laugh behind her glove and shouts that she finally gets it. She apologizes for her reaction, saying she heard summoned beings were supposed to be scary monsters, but then she smiles and says he actually seems like a really nice guy. Takomi is sweating bullets from all the praise, thinking about how much drama this huge misunderstanding has caused, while Karen watches with a scary look, and Din puffs out her chest in total pride. He tries to clear things up fast, swearing they aren't scary and are just normal students, but when Phoebe asks what he means by we, he explains that 24 of them were summoned together and are all hanging out in the capital. BB lets the news sink in, her face getting serious as she whispers that she finally gets it. Seeing his chance, he leans in and asks if she knows Hirai Masato, then gets all hyped up because Masato is actually their class rep. Phoebe gets this huge smirk on her face while Takumi freaks out, asking if Masato is okay, and she just laughs because she knows that guy way better than he thinks. She says sorry for the sudden news and explains she's invited the other summoned heroes to a party, but Takumi looks worried and asks her if something is actually wrong. He recognizes those names instantly. Imanaka the Saint and Kawaga the Ice Mage were his old classmates. He gets a quick flashback of them smiling, but then his vibe totally changes as he asks what happened to Hirai. Phoebe just starts cracking up and explains that Hirai was a total nightmare who spent all his time bothering the maids and flexing about how great he was, and we even see a flashback. She keeps telling the story with a big smile, explaining how this awesome paladin named Sakatima finally stepped in and shut Hirai down for good. In the flashback, the hero pins Hirai. Akumi finally lets out a huge sigh of relief. He's honestly just glad to hear the class's biggest troublemaker is doing okay. He leans back with his drink, totally shocked. High up in the fortress overlooking the mountains, someone asks Takumi if he made that massive glass window, and he explains that since he's not a fighter, he helps out by rebuilding the base. B mentions how the fortress was glowing like crazy during the last full moon and calls out Kinoshita for being the one behind it. So he just laughs, and she asks what other wild plans he's cooking up. Kinoshita remembers Gustav complaining about the water shortage, and suddenly he gets a genius idea. He starts muttering about building a whole plumbing system, which totally catches Phoebe off guard. While he's deep in thought, Phoebe watches him closely, but Sisha is just standing there looking totally confused by the whole conversation. Kinoshita finally locks in his big idea and starts hyping up his plan to run water through the entire castle and all the way down the mountain, promising that work will go way faster if they just keep backing him up. Phoebe's face lights up with pure joy, and she beams as she realizes just how massive and genius his whole plan is. She drops into a super deep bow to show him some major respect. She knows it's finally time to show how much she appreciates him. Totally hyped, Phoebe promises to set up a meeting ASAP, and Karen Maxwell sits right across from a totally lost Takumi inside the carriage, and he's just staring up, completely baffled by everything that just went down. She leans in to get the scoop from Karen, while he asks if Phoebe Bori was talking about some fancy business party. Kanoshi realizes he was right. Phoebe is throwing a huge banquet just for him, and he starts blushing hard because at only 18, he's already getting dragged into some serious adult business. He slumps back in his chair, totally not feeling the idea, so Karen tells him he can just say no. But she warns him that Phoebe is obsessed with his power and will do whatever it takes to get him on her side. Her vibe turns totally dark as she lists off every dirty trick like booze, bribes, women, and blackmail, leaving Kinoshita absolutely shaking in terror. She snaps right back to being super professional, fixes her glasses, and tells the terrified guy he's totally safe as long as she's there, then asks what he's doing for the rest of the day. Suddenly, his fear turns into pure hype as he clenches his fist and announces his big plan. He's going to build a massive water system for the entire fortress and every single house, leaving Karen and Phoebe completely speechless. Inside the office, Sisha asks Takumi what he's doing for the afternoon, and after thinking it over across from Karen, he announces he's going to build a whole water system for the fortress and the houses. Karen is totally caught off guard and asks, "A water supply?" in disbelief, but he just gives her a simple nod. He stares at his reflection in his tea and explains that all the fresh water Gustav and the guys use is being pumped away from the meat processing plants. I'll go with, Karen listens closely and nods, knowing this business is the only thing keeping their whole land alive. Let's check the teenager vibe. He starts freaking out about the water running dry, picturing everyone struggling to wash their clothes or even themselves with tiny rations. And he knows that if things get gross, nasty diseases are going to spread like crazy. He looks Karen dead in the eye and admits it's super awkward to say, but this whole mess finally made him realize how lucky he was back in his old world. He looks her right in the eye and finishes his point, arguing that if everyone in the fortress had free water, their lives would be way better, while Karen just stands there thinking it over. He just sits there chilling with his drink while Karen Maxwell stares back, her eyes wide with shock as she tries to process his wild offer. He knows the fort's water is an easy fix, but she warns him that doing the whole city would be a massive job. And even though the scale shocks him, he realizes his mana has grown. She flashes a confident grin and tells him he's got this, leaving him so shook that he can only stutter back a nervous yes. Outside the fortress walls, life is a total grind, as workers wrangle giant tusked beasts and haul heavy barrels just to keep the place running. A bit later at the construction site, Takumi is rocking his work jacket and hard hat, stopping for a second to wipe his forehead and take a breather. He's standing with Gustav and Bams, checking out the brand new pipes and faucets they just finished, and one soldier says it's a solid start. Gustav is dying to give it a shot, but Takumi says the people who actually need it should go first. So he grins at the workers and tells them the water is officially ready for them to check out. Down at the brand new construction site, a group of local workers are checking out the pipes, and this guy with a thick mustache looks totally confused when his buddy says it's just a pile. Edvard Koch steps up in his work gear and shows a rookie that turning this handle is all it takes to get the water flowing through the pipe. He gives a confident smirk and twists the valve, making a huge blast of water shoot out and crash onto the ground. The mustache guy and his young co-worker are totally floored, staring in pure shock at what just happened. Everyone's jaw drops while Edvard geeks out over his big brain move, explaining that building regular pipes was way too much work. So he's just going to pull water straight through a portal and filter it for instant clean water whenever they need it. This system works just like modern water treatment, where they take reservoir water and scrub out all the junk and chemicals until it's safe to drink. It all kicks off at the intake well, where they measure the water, then it hits a mixer for some cleaning chemicals before heading to a chamber where all the gross gunk clumps together so they can easily get rid of it. Hard Coke points to the new tap and swears the water is totally safe. But while the guy with the big mustache checks it out carefully, his younger partner isn't so sure. The guy with the mustache is super nervous and asks if they can really use that much since they're running low, but Edvard just laughs it off and says the portal has more than enough, leaving the two workers completely stunned and speechless. Everyone's jaw drops as they crowd around to see what's going on, and a guy with a ponytail grins, asking the crew what they think of their new boss. The workers, after he pumps them up, the whole place comes to life, and the utility room is buzzing with staff and maids using all that clean water to wash food and fill up their buckets. You can literally feel the crazy energy coming from the building as it sits there baking under the hot sun. Somewhere else, the workday is finally wrapping up as Takumi Kinoshita wipes his face and lets out a long sigh, realizing the whole day is already over. He's standing all alone in the quiet bathroom holding his hard hat, and it hits him. He rushed like crazy, but he's actually got way more time than he thought. Edvard was feeling super hyped since his magic was still maxed out, and he realized he could probably take down the whole city's layout next. Edvard snaps out of his head and finds himself in a hallway with Karen, Gustav, and Bamps, and when Karen calls for Gustav, Edvard asks what's going on. So Gustav explains they're just getting ready for their big trip to the city. Gustav leaned in close to Edvard with Bamps right there, calling him master and telling him to drop the formal act since they were officially his subordinates now. Edvard was totally caught off guard by how casual they were being, and he started stuttering because he just couldn't bring himself to talk to his elders like they were friends. He was totally lost for words with Gustav and Bamps right beside him. But Karen jumped in and told them to start acting like they actually run this fortress. Edvard just stared down at the hard hat in his hands, trying to wrap his head around this crazy new situation. He looks up, blushing a little with a satisfied grin on his face. He's totally relieved and gives Gustav and Bamps a huge thanks for having his back, while Gustav smirks and jokes that he's still way too polite as Bamps laughs along. While the three of them stand together, Kara Maxwell watches from a doorway and jokes to someone nearby about how fast Gustav switched back to his polite act, making him laugh and scratch his head. A covered wagon rattles down a dirt road through these massive hills under a cloudy sky, and the big adventure is finally starting. Takumi Kinoshita is getting tossed around in a shaky wagon with Sisha, Kara Maxwell, and Gustav, and the whole ride is a total cramped nightmare. Cleans leans over to Sisha with a worried look and asks if she's really ready for the madness that's about to happen. Sisha's face twists in disgust as she makes a gross gagging sound, but she still forces herself to yell that she's totally ready for anything. Her confidence disappears as she slumps over looking super sick, and Takumi realizes she's totally about to barf. Flashback to an hour ago. Karen Maxwell makes it clear they aren't going on a picnic, but a super hyped Sisha holds up a lunchbox full of medicine and says back in the present, they're all set to head out when Takumi asks if it's time to go. But then he looks over at a little kid with a backpack and says they should bring one more person along. Karen Maxwell shuts that idea down instantly, making it clear that Sisha is coming with them no matter what. She knows Sisha could get seriously hurt, but she insists they have to risk it to prove they're officially tight with the Yulinov clan. This alliance is a total game changer because it'll finally stop people from hating on her tribe and let them safely hunt for medicine in way more places. Sisha overhears the whole plan and suddenly jumps right between them, looking super hyped as she shouts that it's an awesome idea, totally scaring the life out of Karen. Seeing her this happy hits Takumi with a dark memory of her and her beast shaking in pure terror, looking like their lives were basically over. He snaps out of that dark memory and looks over at Sisha, who's shaking and looks like a ghost from the bumpy wagon ride, making it clear she's in really bad shape. Seeing how stressed she is, he tells Gustav and Bams to tag along, explaining that Sisha has been super sheltered her whole life and worries way too much, which just makes her look totally. She calls out to Sisha, who's looking down with her hands shaking, and she finally admits that right before they left the house, she actually saw a vision of the future. She looks up at him with total terror in her eyes and nods, making him ask if that nightmare she saw is actually going to happen. Back in the carriage, Sisha pulls out a piece of paper and tells Gustav and Bams that this is exactly why she's so freaked out, leaving the two new guards looking totally lost. The note has a super mysterious message that says, "Don't be scared," but then it claims death is the key to their success and a massive rebirth is about to go down. Sisha is totally freaked out and asks Takumi why he's talking about death while he just stares at the paper with a super serious look as the creepy prophecy sinks in. Kinoshita stares hard at the paper in his hands, his face getting serious as he reads about a dark fate where a girl from the Sisha clan is doomed to die at twilight. But then he looks up to see Sisha Mayuga looking absolutely terrified with tears in her eyes as she holds her hands together and asks if she's really going to die, so he immediately tries to. He looks back at the document and points out that while it mentions death, it also talks about rebirth, then explains that his own future is always super blurry until after it actually happens, so he asks. She looks up at him with wide, shaky eyes and tells him she feels way more relaxed just being by his side, calling him her master. Those words really hit home, and later, while their wagon bumps down the road, he thanks her for being so kind, but warns her not to push herself too hard. The wagon finally pulls into town, and Takumi stumbles out, looking totally motion-sick, muttering about how he'll never get used to these bumpy rides, while Karen teases a super red. He turns away from the noise to scan the town square, seeing regular people chatting by the well and guards on watch, all while he stays totally chill and takes in every little detail. Check out the town square, as Gustav explains that this is where everyone grabs their water every single day. A few days later, a woman started crying and caused a huge scene nearby. He asked if this was the water station, but Gustav noticed she didn't have a win tag. Gustav broke down the town's hardcore rules, where everyone gets 3 tags a day to trade for water, and if you don't have one, you're getting absolutely nothing. No, as that sad woman walked away, it was clear she'd either lost her tag or used up her water, making Takumi realize how brutal these rules are, and that he needs to stay sharp and keep. Right then, Karen Maxwell walks up, calling him master, and asks if he's just there to watch, but he clenches his fist and says no way. He's actually there to make their lives better. He finally locked in and yelled for everyone to get moving. The whole crew, with a super hyped Sisha leading the way, headed straight for the town's water supply. Karen watched